Chapter 645. Soon after, Qin Zhong returned and landed in front of Qin Feiyang. He shook his head and said, "Your Highness, the two people you want to inquire about don't exist." Qin Feiyang said, "Then forget it. Let's go back to the capital." In this short time, he had completely forgotten Yan Nanshan and Jiang Jingyi. Even the memories of Luo Qingzhu and the others began to blur. He was worried that if he didn't return to the capital, everyone would forget him. Qin Zhong nodded and said, "Okay, let's go to the state capital to find the transmission altar." "No need." Qin Feiyang shook his head. Since everything here was transformed by his obsession, it was only a matter of thought to go where he wanted to go. Swish! His mind moved slightly. Sure enough, the scenery in front of him changed rapidly. The next moment, he and Qin Zhong appeared in the garden outside the bedroom. Qin Zhong and Qin Zhong were very surprised. What was going on? The two were about to ask Qin Feiyang how he did it. Qin Feiyang was the first to speak. "Uncles, please help me call Mother and Imperial Father over." The two were slightly stunned and didn't understand. "Go quickly." Qin Feiyang didn't explain, and there was a majesty in his tone that couldn't be disobeyed. Okay. The two nodded repeatedly, turned around, and quickly flew away. Qin Feiyang stood alone in the garden, his eyes full of confusion. Although everything here was fake, he still wanted to do something for his parents before it ended. But what could he do in half an hour? Swish! But just as he was deep in thought, a black figure appeared in the sky above his head. This person's appearance was exactly the same as Qin Feiyang in the real world. Thick black hair draped over his shoulders, and a black robe set off his tall figure. Those dark eyes were like two bottomless pits, captivating the soul. But the difference was that this Qin Feiyang had a very strong hostility between his eyebrows. Moreover, as soon as this black-clothed Qin Feiyang appeared, time in this world seemed to stop. The stream stopped flowing. The flowers and plants no longer swayed. The palace, maids, and guards in the distance remained motionless. Everything stopped. He looked down at Qin Feiyang and said angrily, "Everything here is what you wanted. Do you really want to destroy it?" Qin Feiyang was shocked. He raised his head and looked at the black-clothed Qin Feiyang. His pupils shrank as he asked in surprise, "Who are you?" The black-clothed Qin Feiyang said, "I am you, and you are me. We are both Qin Feiyang." Qin Feiyang's eyes trembled, and he said, "Impossible. There is only one Qin Feiyang, and that is me." The black-clothed Qin Feiyang sneered, "Then tell me, why do I exist? How did he appear in your illusion? How would I know? Tell me, who are you? What's the purpose of impersonating me?" Qin Feiyang said angrily, "We are the same person. How can I impersonate you? And my appearance is to stop you from destroying this illusion." The black-clothed Qin Feiyang said. "Why?" Qin Feiyang frowned. "Because he is your obsession and your inner demons." At this moment, the black shadow appeared again. Inner demons. Qin Feiyang's body trembled. He actually had inner demons? When a person's obsession is too deep, he will gradually produce inner demons. Before, the inner demons did not appear because he was not formed yet. Now, you have entered the illusion. Believe all this. The inner demons have finally met the opportunity and were successfully born. The black shadow explained. The black-clothed Qin Feiyang said angrily, "You old thing, aren't you annoying? If it weren't for you running out again and again, he wouldn't have found out that all this was fake." The black shadow ignored him and looked at Qin Feiyang, saying, "You need to defeat the inner demons by yourself. I can't help you. I can only give you a hint. Stick to your beliefs." The black-clothed Qin Feiyang roared, "This is between me and him. Why do you care? Get out. I will leave even if you don't tell me." The black shadow glanced at the black-clothed Qin Feiyang indifferently, looked at the original Qin Feiyang and said, "Remember my words." After that, the black shadow disappeared without a trace. Beliefs? Qin Feiyang muttered to himself, not understanding the meaning of this sentence. He looked up at the black-clothed Qin Feiyang and said, "Since you are my obsession, you should understand that everything here must be destroyed. With me here, you are delusional." The black-clothed Qin Feiyang sneered. "Is that so?" Qin Feiyang smiled coldly and said, "You are just my inner demons. What ability do you have to stop me?" Not only did the illusion have to be destroyed, but the inner demons also had to be eliminated. According to ancient records, the inner demons would not only affect a person's state of mind, but also affect their future cultivation. Even to a certain extent, they would kill the original consciousness and replace it. What it meant was, if the inner demons were allowed to grow, sooner or later, Qin Feiyang's consciousness would be erased by the inner demons, and then this body would be controlled by the inner demons. However, hearing Qin Feiyang's words, the inner demons not only did not panic, but also looked up to the sky and laughed. "What are you laughing at?" Qin Feiyang frowned, and a premonition of uneasiness rose in his heart. "Have you forgotten? You are only a 9-star martial master now. You don't even have battle chi or battle arts. Look at me again. I have the cultivation of the real world. If I want to kill you now, it will be as easy as flipping my hand. But you still want to get rid of me. Aren't you naive?" The inner demons sneered. Hearing these words, Qin Feiyang looked at the inner demons in surprise. The cultivation of the inner demons was indeed a 1-star war master. The inner demons looked down at Qin Feiyang from above and said, "I'll give you a chance now. As long as you don't destroy this place, I won't kill you." Qin Feiyang said, "If we don't destroy the illusion, you and I will die in the end." "So what if I die? Tell me, haven't you been tired of living all these years? In order to return to the imperial capital, in order to take revenge, you have put in so much effort, but where is the imperial capital now? Where is the enemy? Even if you see that enemy, what can you do? But it's different here. Look at how beautiful everything is in front of you. Those things that made you suffer didn't happen. So, I'd rather stay here and enjoy this last hour of good time than go out and continue to suffer." The inner demons said. Qin Feiyang was silent. He couldn't refute, because the inner demons were born from his obsession. What he said was naturally his heart. A moment later, Qin Feiyang sighed. "I thought so too, but we have to face reality. I don't want my mother in the real world to be sad when she hears the news of my death." The inner demons frowned. "So, you insist on destroying this place?" Qin Feiyang nodded. "If that's the case, then don't blame me for being impolite." The heart demon's viciousness surged, and a monstrous might surged towards Qin Feiyang with the force of toppling mountains and overturning seas. Qin Feiyang immediately felt the aura of death enveloping him. In front of a 1-star war sect, a 9-star martial master had no power to resist. Was he going to die just like that? He asked himself, was dying like this considered relief? No, this wasn't relief. This was a sign of cowardice. But what could he do to break this killing trap? Before the black shadow left, he had specially instructed him to persevere in his beliefs. But what was this belief? The monstrous might had already pressed down, and Qin Feiyang's life was hanging by a thread. But at this moment, his eyes suddenly blossomed with a brilliant light, like 2 bright moons. He understood, returning to the imperial capital, seeing his mother, and taking revenge. This was his belief. As long as his belief was there was still hope. Boom! The next moment, a powerful aura rushed out from Qin Feiyang's body. His cultivation was like a volcanic eruption, crazily soaring. Martial sect, war king, war emperor, war sect. Moreover, his thin and small body was also growing taller. "I will persevere in my beliefs and maintain my original heart." No one, no matter what, will be able to stop my footsteps. Finally, Qin Feiyong regained his true appearance, carrying a monstrous aura. He broke through the pressure of the inner demons, rushed into the sky, and stood opposite the inner demons. His body was as tall and straight as a pine tree. His long hair danced in the wind. At this moment, he was like a war god that had returned, domineering and unparalleled. He actually recovered his cultivation. The inner demons' pupils contracted. Qin Feiyong looked at the inner demons coldly and said, "Do you want to dissipate on your own, or do you want me to personally erase you? Choose." Haha, the inner demons laughed out loud. His black hair fluttered in the wind, and his black clothes fluttered in the wind, as if a demon god had descended to the world. Qin Feiyong said, "Looks like I have to personally erase you." "Erase me? Are you joking? Although you have recovered your cultivation now, I also know the battle arts that you know. What right do you have to kill me?" The inner demon's black eyes shone brightly, and he raised his hand and pointed in the air. Ultimate void. A formless energy immediately surged toward Qin Feiyong like a tidal wave, covering the sky and covering the earth. Is that so? Then I'll just have to experience how strong I, Qin Feiyong, am. Qin Feiyong said expressionlessly. He also raised his arm and performed the ultimate void. Boom! The two invisible forces collided with a loud bang, and the palace and garden below instantly turned into ashes. At the same time, the two people in the sky each retreated dozens of feet, and a trace of blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. Not bad. Guthyuan sword art. The inner demons grinned, and a red sword aura surged out. 30 sword shadows appeared out of nowhere, carrying a sharp edge that could destroy the world, and slashed towards Qin Feiyong. "You're not bad either," Qin Feiyong said. With a wave of his hand, 30 sword shadows appeared in the air as well. Another internecine outcome. "I've told you, you can't kill me." The inner demons laughed. The 9-leaf fire lotus, the red sword soul, and the purple gold dragon soul soared into the clouds at the same time. The terrifying aura, the destructive edge, and the majestic dragons might spread in all directions. At this moment, the world shook and the void distorted. The clouds in the sky were like angry waves in a vast ocean, rolling crazily. Is this the extent of my strength? Qin Feiyong muttered to himself. He was the one who gave birth to the inner demons. Fighting the inner demons was the same as fighting himself. In the past, he did not think he was this strong. Boom! Chapter 646. It's useless. Whether it's fighting souls, battle arts, or even the return in battle arts, I know them all. If we continue, we'll be tied at most. However, you don't have much time to waste, because you only have half an hour here. Although you've recovered your cultivation now, there won't be any other changes. In the end, you'll still forget everyone, everything, and even battle arts and fighting souls. The inner demons laughed wildly. Is that so? Then let me tell you, you'll be the one who disappears in the end. Qin Feiyong said, I really don't know where you got your confidence from. The inner demons mocked. My confidence comes from my belief. But you don't have belief, only desire in your heart. In fact, it's all my fault. I was too obsessed. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been born. Qin Feiyong sighed. What's the use of saying so much nonsense? Only by fighting to the end will we know who will be the one who survives in the end. Come on. The inner demons roared to the sky. You're right. Fighting is the best choice. Only one can survive today. This person must be me. Qin Feiyong's eyes shot out a fierce light, accompanied by an earth-shattering sound. The 6 fighting souls cut across the sky at the same time and collided with each other. Immediately, a destructive wave, with this place as the center, surged out in all directions. Wherever it passed, the ground cracked and the void shook. The towering halls collapsed one after another. The rumbling was deafening and dust covered the sky. Puff! At the same time, Qin Feiyang and the inner demons spat out a mouthful of blood. However, Qin Feiyang only retreated a few feet before he stabilized his body. However, the inner demons was sent flying on the spot. Even his physical body cracked and blood stained the sky. How is this possible? The inner demons' face was full of disbelief. They had the same cultivation and the same fighting soul. But why was there such a huge gap between them? Although you have everything that I have, you are still the inner demons. Qin Feiyang looked at the inner demons without any emotion in his eyes. Is that so? The inner demons muttered to themselves. Suddenly they shouted hysterically, I don't believe it! Boom! A blood-red light burst out of his body. His long hair and eyes quickly turned blood-red, and his fighting spirit soared into the sky. It was the battle character formula. Qin Feiyang sighed, give up! No matter what, the inner demons were his obsession. He did not want to destroy them with his own hands. The word give up has never existed in your dictionary, and neither do I. Today either you die or I die. The inner demons rushed toward Qin Feiyang. All right, I'll fulfill your wish. Qin Feiyang nodded. He also activated the battle formula and rushed toward the inner demons. In an instant, the two of them converged. They raised their arms at the same time and activated the return formula. At the same time, a dazzling golden light appeared in their palms. Boom! The two big hands collided. It was as if a golden sun had exploded in the sky. Golden light shone in all directions and illuminated the sky for miles. Ah! The next moment, the inner demon screamed and was sent flying. Qin Feiyang also groaned and retreated. Blood kept dripping from the corner of his mouth. His face was pale, but the battle was over. The inner demons who were sent flying could be seen cracking at a speed visible to the naked eye. There was no way to repair them. Blood rained down, and the sky was dyed red. When the inner demon stabilized his body, he looked at Qin Feiyang and said, I can't accept this. I know. Qin Feiyang nodded. But you're right. The inner demons are inner demons after all. They don't have the will and belief of the original body. But I don't regret it. I also hope that you don't regret it and continue to walk on bravely. The inner demons said. At this moment, he didn't have the slightest bit of hostility. There was even a smile on his bleeding face. No matter what setbacks I encounter in the future, I will face them with strength. I won't regret it. Qin Feiyang also smiled. I believe in you, and I also wish you well. The inner demons smiled brightly. His body disintegrated and then quickly dissipated between heaven and earth. Thank you, Qin Feiyang whispered. He was very gratified to be able to say goodbye to the inner demons in such a way. At least it proved that his inner demons also had a kind side. As soon as the inner demons disappeared, the time in this world also began to move. Everything that was still also woke up. But Qin Feiyang's appearance didn't change anymore. He looked at the ruins below and the familiar imperial palace. There wasn't much nostalgia in his eyes. Whoosh! Soon, two figures broke through the air and landed beside Qin Feiyang. Who are you? The two of them looked at Qin Feiyang in surprise. These two people were the Empress and the Emperor. Qin Feiyang looked up at the two of them and said with a smile, I'm your child. Child? The two of them looked at each other. Their eyes were full of suspicion. Did they have such a child? Mother, I'm really happy to be able to meet you here in advance. And today is also the most peaceful day I've had in more than 10 years. I really hope that time can slow down a little. However, what should go will go in the end. What should disappear will disappear in the end. But, Mother, please believe in me. I will definitely return to the imperial capital, and it won't be long. Qin Feiyang ignored the expressions of the two of them and said to himself, But when he said the last sentence, his dark eyes suddenly burst out with an incomparably firm light. As soon as he finished speaking, the Empress immediately collapsed and turned into specks of starlight, drifting between heaven and earth. "What did you do?" Seeing this, the Emperor immediately stared at Qin Feiyang angrily. "What did I do? I want to ask you, why did you treat me like that more than 10 years ago?" Qin Feiyang roared. More than 10 years ago? The Emperor frowned. He really didn't know what Qin Feiyang was talking about. Looking at the Emperor's expression, Qin Feiyang couldn't help but shake his head and laugh at himself. This was just an illusion. The benevolent father in front of him was only a figment of his imagination. How could he know about those things? "Father, this may be the last time I call you this in my life. Take care," Qin Feiyang said with a smile. He looked at the Emperor for a moment and no longer hesitated. With a slight thought, the Emperor's figure also collapsed in an instant. Crack! Boom! As soon as the Emperor and Empress disappeared, the sky was suddenly filled with violent winds, lightning, and thunder. Dazzling lightning fell. The void collapsed, the sky shattered, and the earth sank. Boom! In less than 3 breaths, the world completely collapsed and fell into darkness. At the same time, on the bridge of helplessness, a long sigh sounded and spread slowly. Qin Feiyang, who was standing under the door frame, had a touch of sadness between his eyebrows. He looked up at the blood-red sun in the sky. The illusion was finally over. However, everything that happened in the illusion was clearly imprinted in his mind. His longing for his mother was unprecedentedly strong. He wished that he could see his mother in the real world right now, even if it was just a glance. Alas! After a long time he sighed deeply, collected his thoughts, and lowered his head to look ahead. At that moment, his pupils shrank. In front of him was a flat grassland, about a few 100 meters long, and at the end of the grassland was an endless sea of blood. In the sea of blood, the wind whistled and the blood waves surged to the sky, filled with a shocking evil spirit, and on the shore of the sea of blood, there were small boats floating. They were only 3 meters long and 1 meter wide, and were dark all over. In fact, it was more appropriate to call them canoes. But these small boats not only did not have sails, but also did not have paddles. The boats were also empty. In Qin Feiyang's mind, there were countless questions. Where was this? What were these small boats for? Suddenly, he found a stone tablet on the shore, on which 2 shocking words were engraved. Sea of Bitterness. Qin Feiyang's eyes trembled slightly. He did not expect that there was really a sea of bitterness. The meaning of these small boats was clear at a glance. According to folklore, the other side was on the other side of the sea of bitterness. In other words, they had to take these small boats and cross this sea of blood to reach the other side. But in Qin Feiyang's mind, another question crawled up. He remembered that before entering the illusion, behind the door frame was still the endless bridge of helplessness. But why did he wake up from the illusion and directly come to the sea of bitterness? He looked down and was surprised to find that he was still standing on the bridge of helplessness. He hurriedly turned around, and the familiar door frame immediately entered his line of sight. And at this moment, there was not only Dongfang Wuhin and Morong Xiong beside him, but also Wolf King, Ren Wushuang, and others. But now they were all standing on the bridge, motionless. Obviously, as the Black Shadow said, they were all trapped in the illusion. Qin Feiyang glanced at them and looked over the door frame at the bridge of helplessness behind. At that moment, he was stunned. The bridge of helplessness was only a dozen meters long. He clearly remembered that before stepping on the bridge of helplessness, he saw that the bridge of helplessness was winding and endless. After walking for a long time, they came to the door frame. However, at this moment, the bridge of helplessness in front of him was only a dozen meters long. Wasn't this too ridiculous? And under the bridge of helplessness, it was no longer a black ocean, but a black river. There was also a strange situation. The people of Feng State and Yu State, as well as Wan Qiu and the others, were also on the bridge of helplessness. Moreover, at this moment, their eyes were closed and they were actually walking in place. What was going on? Qin Feiyang racked his brains to think. Suddenly, he thought of the illusion. He looked at the door frame again, and then looked at the sea of bitterness. After a moment of silence, a wry smile crept onto his face. In fact, the bridge of helplessness he saw now was the real bridge of helplessness. And the bridge of helplessness he saw at the beginning was just an illusion to confuse them. In other words, from the moment they stepped on the bridge of helplessness, they had already fallen into the illusion, but they didn't know it. And the current situation of Wan Qiu and the others could also be explained. It was estimated that they were in the illusion and hadn't reached the door frame yet, so they kept walking. In fact, they were always in the same place. Thinking of this, Qin Feiyang couldn't help but have a trace of fear in his eyes. This bridge of helplessness was really terrifying. Chapter 647. But fortunately everything was over. The next problem to consider was how to wake up Wolf King and the others from the illusion. "Wake up, all of you!" All of a sudden, Qin Feiyang roared. Wolf King immediately shuddered and opened his eyes, which were full of confusion. It worked. Qin Feiyang was a little stunned. He just tried it casually, but he didn't expect that it would really wake up Wolf King. Wolf King glanced at the blood sea, then at the bridge of helplessness, and asked suspiciously, "Little Qin Zi, where is this?" "It's the sea of bitterness in front of us." Qin Feiyang briefly explained the situation. Wolf King nodded and said, "It turns out that what I saw before was just an illusion." He looked a little disappointed. Qin Feiyang asked curiously, "What did you see in the illusion?" "I saw a gold mountain, countless treasures, and even the flower of life and the fire of life." Wolf King chuckled. Thinking of it now, his eyes couldn't help but turn green and drool. "That's it." Qin Feiyang was stunned. "What else? I'm such a simple wolf. How could I be trapped there? Even without your reminder, I can walk out of the illusion by myself." Wolf King was disdainful. "Narcissist." Qin Feiyang rolled his eyes. But then again, apart from being a little shameless, Wolf King really didn't have any strong desire. The only thing was that he liked treasures, but that was only for a short time. Take the fire of life and Mu Tianyang's ribs, for example. At first, he liked them very much, but after a long time, he didn't even bother to look at them. It could be said that Wolf King's heart was actually purer than anyone else's. Qin Feiyang looked at Ren Wuxuang and the others again and raised his eyebrows. None of them woke up. Their hearts must be very dirty. Wolf King smirked. "Do you know how to speak?" Qin Feiyang frowned. Wolf King chuckled and said, "Except for little Ren." Qin Feiyang rolled his eyes at it. However, what Wolf King said made sense. These people were all hiding many things in their hearts. It would not be easy to wake them up. However, if he could enter their illusions like Black Shadow, it would not be difficult. However, he could not do such a thing. "Pah!" Suddenly, crisp slapping sounds could be heard one after another. Qin Feiyang was taken aback. He looked in the direction of the voice, and his expression froze. At this moment, the Wolf King is raising his claws and continuously slapping Dongfang Wuhan and Murong Xiong. "I say, can you not take advantage of me when I'm down?" Qin Feiyang was speechless. "Fuck, what are you talking about? I'm helping them, do you understand?" Wolf King glared at Qin Feiyang angrily, turned around and continued to slap the two of them, his eyes full of smirks. Qin Feiyang shook his head, helplessly. Not long after, Dongfang Wuhan and Murong Xiong's faces were swollen, like pig heads, and blood was flowing from their mouths. But even so, the two of them showed no signs of waking up. "Fuck, they can't even wake up like this." What good thing did these two bastards encounter in the illusion? Wolf King's claws hurt, and he looked at the two of them strangely. Nothing good, but don't kill them now. Qin Feiyang smiled coldly. Wolf King raised his eyebrows and asked in confusion, "We have already reached the sea of bitterness. Shouldn't we end their lives?" "No hurry." Qin Feiyang shook his head and whispered a few words in Wolf King's ear. "I see." Wolf King suddenly understood and said with a smirk, "You are really hateful, but I like it." Qin Feiyang said with a smile, "Well, quickly think of a way to wake them up." "Take your time to think about it. I'm going to get rid of Wan Qiao and the other trash." Wolf King's eyes flashed with killing intent, and he walked towards Wan Qiao and the others. Qin Feiyang didn't stop him. On the contrary, he agreed with Wolf King's approach, because this was the way of the world. Take advantage of your illness to kill you. But just as Wolf King entered the doorframe, a blood-red light curtain suddenly appeared on the doorframe and bounced Wolf King out. With a bang, he smashed into the grass under the bridge of helplessness, causing Wolf King to grimace in pain. Qin Feiyang looked at the light curtain in surprise. "Fuck, you dare to hurt me. You are really looking for trouble. See if I don't destroy you today." Wolf King got up and angrily rushed towards the doorframe. "Don't go." Qin Feiyang hurriedly grabbed him and said in a deep voice, "The existence of this door should be to cut off our way back." "What do you mean?" Wolf King was stunned. Qin Feiyang said, "That is to say, as long as you pass the test, you can't go back. So we can't kill them now." Wan Qiao and the others were close by, but they couldn't get close. This made Wolf King very unhappy. "There is still a long way to go. What's the rush?" Qin Feiyang rolled his eyes at it and lowered his head to ponder. Suddenly, an idea came to him. The reason why they fell into the illusion was because they were on the bridge of helplessness. If they left the bridge of helplessness, would they wake up naturally? Thinking of this, he waved his hand and led Wolf King, Ren Wuxuang, and the others into the castle. It worked. As soon as they entered the castle, Ren Wuxuang and the others opened their eyes one after another. Their eyes were full of confusion. "Ouch, my face hurts." Suddenly, Morong Xiong wailed. Dongfang Wuhan came back to his senses, touched his burning face, and asked in confusion, "Why does my face hurt too?" "You also hurt." Morong Xiong looked at Dongfang Wuhan in surprise. Dongfang Wuhan also looked at Morong Xiong. Suddenly, the two of them flew into a rage. Who did it? The two of them glanced at the crowd gloomily, especially Wolf King, who was stared at by the two of them, because only this damned scoundrel could do such a thing. "Don't look at me." When I and little Qin Zi woke up from the illusion, you were already like this. I don't know who did it. Wolf King shook his head. Seeing Wolf King's innocent look, Fatso and Shenmei next to him blushed. Although they didn't see what happened outside with their own eyes, hearing the conversation between Wolf King and Qin Feiyang, they could imagine that it must be Wolf King's doing. However, whether it was Dongfang Wuhan, Morong Xiong, or Ren Wuxuang and Dong Jingyang, they didn't notice the abnormality of the two of them. At this moment, they were all looking at Qin Feiyang and Wolf King in surprise. Dong Jingyang said, "Qin Feiyang, what is the illusion that Wolf King just said?" Qin Feiyang briefly explained again. After listening, they suddenly woke up and couldn't help but feel a lingering fear in their hearts. Lu Xingqian sighed deeply, looked at Qin Feiyang, shook his head, and said, "I didn't expect that I would owe you another favor." Wolf King said lightly, "As long as you don't follow some people's example and bite the hand that feeds you." While speaking, he glanced at Dongfang Wuhan and Morong Xiong. "Of course," Lu Xingqian said with a smile. On the other hand, Dongfang Wuhan and Morong Xiong's faces were extremely ugly. They dared to conclude that this face must be Wolf King's masterpiece. But even if they knew, what could they do? Wolf King's strength was obvious to all. Even if he rode on their heads and peed on them, they could only endure it. Well, We have passed the bridge of helplessness. Next is the sea of bitterness. I hope that everyone can unite and pass this last test. Qin Feiyong said. Hearing, everyone was refreshed. As long as they successfully passed the sea of bitterness and reached the other side, they could enter the sacred place they dreamed of, the capital. At this moment, there couldn't be any more trouble. Dong Jingyang said, I'll say it first. If anyone dares to play any tricks, I, Dong Jingyang, will never be merciful. That's right. After working so hard for so long, I'm only one step away. I don't want to regret it for the rest of my life. Shenlong's eyes were also incomparably sharp. Everyone nodded. In fact, these words were purely for Dongfang Wuhen and Morong Xiong, because among all the people present, these two were the only ones who were not honest. Qin Feiyong glanced at everyone and said, I have one more thing to add. Everyone looked at him. Before we set off, Commander Wang Hong said that only the first 50 people who reached the other side could enter the capital. And now, except for Wan Qiu and others, people from other provinces may be ahead of us. So, if we encounter trouble in the sea of bitterness in the future, we should try our best to avoid it and try to catch up with them. Qin Feiyong said. The 9 provinces were Ling Province, Yun Province, Kong Province, Yu Province, He Province, Feng Province, Yu Province, Kuan Province, and Changzhou. Wan Qiu of Yu Province, Feng Wuxia of Kong Province, and the people of Feng Province and Yu Province could be ignored for the time being, because they were still on the bridge of helplessness, and everyone knew how many people there were in Yun Province and He Province. After Pan Wuyen's death, only Mo Wuxian, Yen Tianfeng, Pei Sanshi, and Lu Yinfeng were left in Yun Province. Tan Wu was left in He Province, but they had never met in Kuan Province and Changzhou, so many people didn't know. What if the people of the 2 provinces added up to more than 50? Then, even if they reached the other side, they wouldn't be qualified to enter the capital. So, they had to race against time now. Lu Xingqian and the others naturally understood this logic. After Qin Feiyong finished speaking, they all nodded in agreement. Qin Feiyong didn't hesitate and led everyone to appear on the bridge of helplessness again. He didn't pay attention to Wan Qiu and the others and immediately walked down the bridge of helplessness and rushed towards the sea of bitterness. Standing by the sea and looking at the endless sea of blood, the group's expression was particularly heavy. Dong Jingyang said worriedly, I wonder what danger is hidden in the sea of bitterness. Lu Xingqian said, no matter what danger there is, we must move forward. Ren Wushuang frowned slightly and looked at the stone tablet with the words Sea of Bitterness engraved on it. Her gaze focused, and she said, Look, there are some small words on the stone tablet. The group walked closer and took a look. There were indeed rows of small words, but the content was hair-raising. First, entering the sea of bitterness, there was no turning back. Once they turned back, they would immediately explode and die. They couldn't even turn back to look. Second, each canoe could only carry 1 person. If there was 1 more person, the canoe would immediately sink into the sea of bitterness. Third, once the canoe entered the sea of bitterness, it couldn't return or it would sink into the sea. Fourth, the water in the sea of bitterness had a terrifying ability. It could wipe out the consciousness of living beings. The content clearly stated that if one fell into the sea of bitterness, they would lose their mind after 3 breaths and become an emotionless blood puppet. Jiang Wei swallowed and said in a low voice, Do you think there are such blood puppets in the sea of bitterness? There must be. Chapter 648. Qin Feiyong's words were not without basis. The 9 regions' great war would be held every 10 years. And today, the great Qin Empire had been established for 10,000 years, and the 9 regions' great war had been held almost 1,000 times. One could imagine how many people had entered the 9 Nether Yellow Springs, and how many people had died in the 9 Nether Yellow Springs. So, in the Sea of Bitterness, there would definitely be blood puppets. Hearing Qin Feiyang's affirmative answer, everyone's heart couldn't help but sink to the bottom. Dongfang Wuhan said, "Junior brother Qin, why don't you send me to the castle?" As the king of the inner palace, it was very shameful to say such words, but there was nothing he could do. He was afraid. Between his life and his dignity, he chose his life without hesitation. "Senior brother Qin, help me too." Murong Xiong clenched his teeth and looked at Qin Feiyang as he pleaded. Ren Wushuang looked at the two of them angrily and said, "You are at least the best of the younger generation in my spiritual state. How can you be so cowardly?" Then he looked at Qin Feiyang and said in a non-negotiable tone, "I won't allow you to help them." Dongfang Wuhan and Murong Xiong immediately lowered their heads in shame. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed as he looked at the two of them and said, "If you can really abandon your dignity, I can send you to the castle." "Feiyang!" Ren Wushuang shouted angrily. Qin Feiyang waved his hand at Ren Wushuang and quietly looked at Dongfang Wuhan and Murong Xiong. The two of them struggled for a moment before cupping their hands and saying, "Thank you, Junior, Brother Qin." Obviously, they still chose to enter the castle. "You!" Ren Wushuang stared at the two of them angrily and finally turned his head to look elsewhere. "Out of sight, out of mind. We are all brothers of the same sect. If you have the ability to help, then help. There is no need to thank me." Qin Feiyang smiled and waved his hand, sending the two of them to the castle. Subsequently, he then sent a sound transmission to Ren Wushuang. "Sister, you should also go to the castle, lest I worry. Do you think I'm them? If you want me to hide, why don't you just let me die?" Ren Wushuang snorted coldly. Qin Feiyang felt helpless. He lowered his head and looked at Wolf King. "You also go to the castle." "I'm not going." Wolf King turned his head, looking incomparably arrogant. "I must go." Qin Feiyang said coldly and directly sent Wolf King in. This was because Wolf King was too active and curious about everything. Who knew when he would turn around to take a look? Furthermore, he felt that the sea of bitterness was even more terrifying than what was described on the stone tablet. "What about you guys?" Qin Feiyang looked at Lu Xingqian and Dong Jingyang. Lu Xingqian smiled and said to King Crocodile, who was lying on his shoulder, "You go and hide too." Since entering the gates of hell, King Crocodile had become the size of a palm and had been lying on his shoulder. As for King Crocodile's ability to transform, it was naturally given by Lu Xingqian. After all, Lu Xingqian was also one of the few best alchemists in the spiritual state. The transformation elixir was nothing to him. After saying that, Lu Xingqian waved his hand and King Crocodile disappeared into thin air. Then he walked straight to the side of a small boat. Why did King Crocodile disappear? Looking at this scene, Ren Wushuang and the others were surprised. Among the people present, only Qin Feiyang knew what was going on, but he also felt that it was unbelievable. Back in the valley, Lu Xingqian admitted that he also had a space treasure. However, as the saying goes, seeing is believing and hearing is false. Therefore, Qin Feiyang did not fully believe it at that time. At this moment, King Crocodile's disappearance was undoubtedly the best proof. And from this point, it could be seen that Lu Xingqian did not intend to continue hiding his strength. Otherwise, he would not have sent King Crocodile into the space treasure in front of everyone's eyes. Sure enough, Lu Xingqian looked at the boundless sea of blood and smiled faintly. In this world, Qin Feiyang is not the only one who has a space treasure. Ren Wushuang and the others focused their eyes. At this moment, in their eyes, Lu Xingqian was like this sea of blood unfathomable. Finally, Dong Jingyang, Shenlong, and Jiang Wei did not say a word. They all chose a small boat and used their actions to prove their determination. Qin Feiyang glanced at them and said again, "Sister, are you really not going in? I told you not to help them, but you insisted. Don't call me sister in the future." Humph. Ren Wuxuang snorted and turned to walk towards a small boat, leaving Qin Feiyang with the back of his head. Qin Feiyang smiled bitterly and hurriedly followed him. Soon, he walked to a small boat and reached out to knock on the hull. He frowned immediately. The boat was made of an unknown wood. The texture was very hard, but no matter how hard it was only wood. Could it withstand the impact of the waves? One had to know. At this moment, the wind was blowing and the waves were rolling on the sea. As if seeing Qin Feiyang's worry, Lu Xingqian smiled faintly. "Since we are here, let's go." Qin Feiyang nodded. Whoosh! The 6 of them jumped into the boat at the same time. Just as they jumped onto the boat, a scene that left them dumbfounded appeared. The storm on the sea had disappeared. At this moment, there were no waves on the sea. It was as calm as a pool of stagnant water. How could this be? They were surprised and bewildered. Lu Xingqian said, "The storm and waves we saw before should also be illusions to frighten us." Qin Feiyang pondered for a while and agreed with Lu Xingqian. On one side there were huge waves, and on the other side there was a weak boat. Who would dare to drive a boat into the sea of bitterness? After all, in the face of such a situation, the first question that came to everyone's mind was that such a small boat could not sail in such huge waves, because once it entered, it would definitely be overturned by the huge waves. In other words, this was a test of everyone's courage and courage. Lu Xingqian shook his head and smiled. "There are tests for us everywhere. I have to admit that this place is really magical." Magical? Dong Jingyan and the others looked at Lu Xingqian and could not help but roll their eyes. Could this be called magical? It was clearly a strange and ever-changing dangerous place that was impossible to guard against. Suddenly, Ren Wuxuang asked, "Do you know how to drive these boats?" Dong Jingyan and the others were taken aback. It was only now that they realized that not only did the boat have no sails, but there were also no paddles. What to do? For a moment, they were all at a loss. Lu Xingqian lowered his head and looked at the boat for a moment. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he said with a smile, "I know how to drive it." They all looked at Lu Xingqian, including Qin Feiyang. Although this boat is made of wood, this kind of wood is comparable to divine iron. According to my observations, every single boat here can be considered a saint artifact. As long as we inject battle chi into it, we can drive the boat. And the speed of the boat is determined by the amount of battle chi we inject. In short, the more battle chi we inject, the faster it will go. Lu Xingqian said. They suddenly understood. Shenlong asked, "What is a holy weapon?" Dong Zhenyang, Jiang Wei, and Ren Wuxuang also looked at Lu Xingqian suspiciously. However, when Qin Feiyang looked at Lu Xingqian, his eyes were filled with disbelief. Lu Xingqian said with a smile, "Brother Qin must also know about holy weapons. If you want to know, ask him." The 4 of them looked at Qin Feiyang in confusion. "Let's talk about it later." Qin Feiyang smiled faintly. A wisp of red sword chi emerged and injected into the boat. Splash! The boat immediately moved forward slowly, and circles of ripples appeared on the sea. Really? Qin Feiyang was a little surprised. He couldn't help but look at Lu Xingqian again and shouted, "Remember, don't look back. Let's go." At that moment, Lu Xingqian and the others mobilized the battle chi in their sea of chi and drove the boat, following Qin Feiyang into the depths of the Blood Sea. From beginning to end, the 6 people's boats were all moving side by side, and they were all controlled at the same speed. In this way, if something happened to someone, the others could think of a way to rescue them in time. Although they couldn't look back in the sea of bitterness, they could still turn their heads to look to the left and right. Soon, the 6 boats entered the deep sea and the journey was calm. The 6 people's nervous moods also slowly eased. Qin Feiyang glanced at Ren Wuxuang and the others and secretly transmitted a message to Lu Xingqian. "How do you know about holy weapons? Don't tell me you saw it. in an ancient book. I don't believe this nonsense. Lu Xingqian secretly laughed. Holy weapons are not a secret in the capital. It's not strange that I know. What do you mean? Are you also from the capital? Qin Feiyang was surprised. Lu Xingqian was silent for a moment and said with a faint smile, Kind of. Kind of? Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. Yes was yes, no was no. What did he mean by kind of? This was too ambiguous. Feiyang, there's a problem with my boat. Wait for me. Suddenly, Ren Wushuang's voice sounded from behind. Qin Feiyang was shocked and instinctively turned his head to look, but suddenly remembered that he couldn't turn his head back, so he hurriedly turned his head back. What was going on? He looked to the left with a look of surprise, because Ren Wushuang's boat was on his left next to him. In the end, he found that there was no problem with Ren Wushuang's boat, and it was still moving side by side with everyone. Moreover, at this moment, Ren Wushuang was also looking ahead, concentrating on steering the boat. But who was the one who made the sound from behind? Sensing Qin Feiyang's gaze, Ren Wushuang turned his head to look at him and asked in confusion, Why are you looking at me? Qin Feiyang transmitted, Did you call me just now? Call you? I haven't spoken from the beginning to the end. When did I call you? You're out of your mind. Ren Wushuang rolled his eyes at him and directly turned his head to look forward, ignoring Qin Feiyang. She was still angry. You didn't call me? Qin Feiyang frowned, but Ren Wushuang, who had just turned his head, suddenly trembled and slowly turned his head to the back. Seeing this, Qin Feiyang's face changed and he shouted, What are you doing? Turn back. Immediately, Ren Wushuang quivered and quickly turned his head back, his eyes full of surprise. At the same time, Qin Feiyang's shout also alarmed Lu Xingqian and the others. What's going on? Wushuang, do you want to die? They all looked at her in shock and anger. I just heard my father's voice. He said he was behind us and told me to wait for him. He's not dead. He's still alive. Ren Wushuang looked at them and became more and more excited. What? Uncle Rin is not dead? Chapter 649. As people who grew up in the capital, they naturally knew Rin Duxing and knew about Rin Duxing's deeds. But wasn't Rin Duxing dead? How could he be in the underworld? Xingqian, Uncle Ren's boat is about to sink, help Uncle Ren. Zhangyang, Uncle Ren's boat is about to sink, help Uncle Ren. Suddenly, a voice came from behind and entered the ears of Lu Xingqian and Dong Jingyang. The two of them were slightly stunned and immediately overjoyed. Rin Duxing was really behind, but then their faces suddenly changed. The boat was about to sink? How could this be? They must help Rin Duxing. The two of them immediately turned their heads and looked behind them. The prompt on the stone tablet was completely thrown to the back of their minds at this time. Back to Qin Feiyang. Hearing Ren Wushuang's words, he lowered his head and fell into deep thought. Lu Xingqian and the others didn't know, but he knew very well that Rin Duxing couldn't leave the ruins and couldn't appear here at all. But why would Ren Wushuang hear Rin Duxing's voice? The most important thing was that if Rin Duxing was really behind them, he should have heard it too. But just now, he didn't hear Rin Duxing's voice at all. In addition, the voice of Ren Wushuang he heard at the beginning was also strange. What was going on? Could it be, suddenly, Qin Feiyang seemed to have thought of something, and his eyes suddenly trembled. He looked up at the crowd and happened to see Dong Jingyang and Lu Xingqian, who were turning their heads. Immediately, Qin Feiyang's face changed, and he shouted, This is an illusion! Don't look back! Boom! As soon as these words came out, Lu Xingqian and Dong Jingyang were like a bolt from the blue. Their bodies and minds trembled, and they hurriedly turned their heads. Cold sweat broke out all over their bodies. If it weren't for Qin Feiyang's timely reminder, they would have already turned around. Earlier, I also heard Ren Wushuang calling me from behind. However, when I asked her, She told me that she wasn't calling me. After that, Ren Wuxuang immediately heard her father calling her. But as far as I know, Ren Duxing is not here at all. So, I'm sure that the voices we heard were illusions. Qin Feiyang said in a deep voice. Lu Xingchen frowned and nodded. That seems to be the case. I also heard Uncle Ren's voice just now. He said that the ship is about to sink and asked me to help him. Dong Jingyang said, I heard it too, and I said exactly the same thing. That's right. The sea of misery can make us hallucinate. Its goal is to lure us back and make us explode. Remember, no matter what you hear, don't turn around. If you can't control yourself, slap yourself. Qin Feiyang warned with a serious face. Pain can keep people awake. Understood. Dong Jingyang and the other 3 nodded. It's just an illusion. But hearing these words, Ren Wuxuang muttered to herself, her face full of disappointment. Qin Feiyang glanced at her. He wanted to comfort her, but he didn't know how to do so. Suddenly, Ren Wuxuang looked at Qin Feiyang and said, How can you be so sure that my father is not here? Qin Feiyang was stunned and secretly scolded himself for being stupid. He accidentally let slip. Ren Wuxuang said, Don't try to lie to me. Tell me honestly, do you know something? Hearing this, Lu Xingchen and the other 3 also looked at Qin Feiyang in surprise. Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment and nodded. I do know the whereabouts of your father. Ren Wuxuang was a very smart woman. Since she had already discovered the clues, no matter what he said now, it was impossible to eliminate Ren Wuxuang's suspicion. So, it was better to simply admit it. Ren Wuxuang's delicate body trembled, and her breathing quickened. Where is he? Tell me. He's really not dead. At the same time, Lu Xingchen and the other 3 looked at each other. Ren Duxing had been missing for so many years. Everyone had long believed that he had died, but they never thought that he was still alive. Since he was alive, then, as Ren Wuxuang asked, where was Ren Duxing now? Looking at Ren Wuxuang's expectant face, Qin Feiyang sighed deeply and shook his head. I can't tell you now. If Ren Wuxuang knew about Ren Duxing's current situation, he was sure that Ren Wuxuang would be even sadder than before. When she was sad, she would naturally be distracted, and the sea of bitterness was full of dangers. Once she was distracted, the consequences would be unimaginable. So, these things should wait until they left the 9 underworlds. But Ren Wuxuang didn't know Qin Feiyang's intentions. She thought that Qin Feiyang was deliberately hiding it from her. She said angrily, Why can't you tell me? I'm his biological daughter. Don't I even have the right to know his whereabouts? I'm doing this for your own good. If you're worried, I can swear to God that Uncle Ren's life is not in any danger now. Qin Feiyang said, Wuxuang, we all know that you miss Uncle Ren very much. But Qin Feiyang must have his reasons for not telling you. Don't ask any more. Lu Xingchen persuaded. Ren Wuxuang frowned and glanced at Lu Xingchen. She said angrily, Do you have the right to speak here? Shut up. Lu Xingchen shrugged and looked helplessly at Qin Feiyang. Then he turned his head to look at the sea of blood in front of him. There was an inexplicable light flashing in the depths of his eyes. Dong Zhengyang, Shenlong, and Jiang Wei also tactfully looked away. Ren Wuxuang looked at Qin Feiyang again and asked, When did you know? Qin Feiyang said a long time ago. Ren Wuxuang said, So, you've been lying to me for a long time? Qin Feiyang nodded. You win. Ren Wuxuang looked at him coldly. After a long time, she gritted her teeth and said 3 words. Then, she turned her head and pursed her lips with a self-deprecating smile. She had always regarded Qin Feiyang as her younger brother and the person she trusted the most, but she didn't expect that Qin Feiyang would lie to her. She was very disappointed. Alas! Looking at Ren Wuxuang's side profile, Qin Feiyang couldn't help but sigh. Although he lied to Run Wushuang, he didn't want Run Wushuang to worry. Even if Run Wushuang was angry now, he didn't regret it. Of course, he could understand Run Wushuang's current mood, because any parent was the most loved and closest person to their children. If it were him today, he would also be angry. Whatever he wanted would come to him. Tian, Mother finally sees you. Wait for Mother. A familiar voice came from behind. Qin Feiyang's body immediately trembled. Tian, don't you want Mother? Don't you miss Mother? Look back and take a look at Mother. This voice was constantly transmitted into Qin Feiyang's ears, with a sadness that couldn't be dissolved. Mother! Qin Feiyang clenched his hands, and his eyes couldn't help turning red. Although he knew it was just an illusion, he still had an urge to look back, because Mother was his only weakness. Tian, save me. Someone wants to kill me. Suddenly, the voice changed the topic and screamed in horror. Damn it! Qin Feiyang cursed inwardly as he forcefully slapped his face. A bloody handprint immediately appeared on his face. At the same time, Ren Wushuang and the others also showed pain and struggle. Obviously, they were also suffering at the moment. For the 6 of them, the current situation could be described as endless suffering. Even though they knew that this was an illusion, those familiar voices continued to tempt them. This was not only a mental torture, but also a mental devastation. It was worse than death. I can't stand it. I want to see who's behind this. Suddenly, Jiang Wei roared and turned his head to look. No. Qin Feiyang and the others hurriedly shouted. But it was too late. Jiang Wei had already completely turned his head away. But in his sight, there was no one, only an endless sea of blood. Xinlong shouted, Jiang Wei, are you crazy? Turn back. I'm not crazy. Am I not living well now? I think the words on the stone tablet are simply alarmist. Jiang Wei sneered. Qin Feiyang and the others were stunned. Looking at it carefully, Jiang Wei did not show any signs of exploding. Was the so-called no turning back really just to scare them? But at the next moment, Jiang Wei's body suddenly exploded. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere. In just an instant, Jiang Wei died, leaving only a scream echoing in the sky above the sea of blood, lingering for a long time. His body actually exploded and he died. Qin Feiyang and the others looked at this scene and were terrified to the extreme. Don't look, turn back. Qin Feiyang roared. Lu Xingqian and the others trembled and hurriedly turned their heads to look ahead. Damn bastard. If I have this ability, I will definitely make this sea of blood disappear. Xinlong roared. Is that so? As long as you turn back now, I will grant you supreme combat power to avenge your companions. At that moment, an extremely seductive voice entered Xinlong's ears. Really? Xinlong asked instinctively and turned his head to look. Qin Feiyang and the others were still sad about Jiang Wei's death. At this moment, when they saw Xinlong turn his head to look behind, their faces suddenly changed. Xinlong, what are you doing? Ren Wushuang roared angrily. Xinlong suddenly quivered and hurriedly turned back. But it was too late. Accompanied by a scream, Xinlong's body also exploded and he died on the spot. Why did you turn back? Are you all idiots? Ren Wushuang scolded and couldn't help but burst into tears. Qin Feiyang, Lu Xingqian, and Dong Jingyang were also sad. Along the way, everyone had seen Xinlong and Jiang Wei's performance, especially when they first entered the death swamp and were surrounded by Mo Wuxian and the others. In order to help everyone, the 2 of them risked their lives. If Qin Feiyang hadn't saved them, they would have died at that time. It could be said that they were the ones who didn't deserve to die the most, but now they ended up without a corpse. Why were good people so short-lived? Yet a selfish person like Yan Tianfeng could continue to live in this world? God was unfair. At the same time, Shan Mei, who was in the castle, was also sobbing. Lu Hong and Lin Yi comforted her by the side. Wolf King, Fatso, and the others also stood aside with a touch of sadness in their eyes. But there were two people who sneered in their hearts. These two people were Dongfang Wuhen and Morong Xiong. They had no sympathy for the death of Shenlong and Jiang Wei, because, in their opinion, Shenlong and Jiang Wei asked for it. Now that they thought about it, they were smart. Although they lost their dignity, they could at least save their lives. Chapter 650. Suddenly, Fatso noticed Dongfang Wuhen's expression and said, "Brother Wolf, guess what they are thinking now?" Wolf King glanced at the two of them and sneered. "Do you still need to guess? They must be secretly happy in their hearts." If he didn't know Qin Feiyang's plan, he would have killed the two of them right now. Outside, a dead person was like a lamp going out. Shenlong and Jiang Wei's boat automatically left the team and turned around to float towards the starting point of the Sea of Bitterness. But where was the end of the Sea of Bitterness? Qin Feiyang and the other three looked at the sea in front of them, their faces full of hesitation. They didn't know what kind of danger was waiting for them ahead. They didn't even know if they could leave the Sea of Bitterness alive. Qin Feiyang took a deep breath, looked at Ren Wushuang and the other two, and said, "The dead can't come back to life. It's useless to be sad. Let's go." At that moment, the four of them poured battle qi into the boat without reservation. Crash! The four boats broke through the wind and waves, moving almost as fast as their flying speed, and swept towards the end of the sea like lightning. Time flew by. Half a month passed. The illusion had not disappeared, and all kinds of tempting voices were lingering in their ears all the time, tormenting them both physically and mentally. Especially at night, the tempting voices were full of tricks. Several times, the four of them almost turned around. It had only been half a month, but it felt as long as a few centuries. On this day, 3 boats floated in front of them, but there was no one in the boat. There was no doubt that the people on these 3 boats had also met with misfortune. This made Qin Feiyang and the other 3 even more vigilant. "Brother Qin, wait for us." Another 3 days passed. A very familiar voice sounded from behind. Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. The owner of this voice should be the valiant woman from Fengzhou, but he didn't know whether this was an illusion or not. He looked at Ren Wushuang and the other 2 and asked, "Did you hear that?" Yes, the 3 of them nodded. Although they heard it, no one dared to believe it easily, because even if the woman from Fengzhou was really behind them, they didn't dare to look back. If they didn't dare to look back, then they couldn't confirm whether it was true or false. This was the most painful thing for them. "Brother Qin, this is not an illusion. We are really behind you. Why don't you slow down and wait for us?" The woman from Fengzhou spoke again. Qin Feiyang and the other 3 looked at each other and hesitated. After pondering for a moment, Lu Xingqian said, "Let's just wait and see. If it really is them, it might not be a bad thing for us." Dong Zhenyang nodded and said, "That's right. The bitter sea is full of dangers. One more person means one more helper." Moreover, the people from Feng Province and Yu Province are quite strong. The boat could only accommodate 1 person. It was also impossible to fly above the Sea of Bitterness. Therefore, he could no longer count on Wolf King, Fatso, and the others in the castle. If they encountered a crisis, they could only shoulder it themselves. After some discussion, the 4 of them slowed down and waited quietly. Voila! A short while later, the sound of surging waves could be heard from behind. In less than 10 breaths' time, 4 small boats appeared side by side beside Qin Feiyang's group. The 4 of them looked over. It was indeed the people from Feng Province and Yu Province. But why were there only 4 people? They remembered that when they met at the Bridge of Helplessness, there were a total of 13 people. The others are all dead. Only the 4 of us 3-star battle grandmasters survived. The blue-haired youth sighed. The valiant woman from Feng province added, the illusion of the bridge of helplessness and the sea of bitterness is too terrifying. It's impossible to guard against it. The other two ordinary-looking women also had melancholy on their faces. Seeing this, Qin Feiyang's group looked at each other. One had to know that the people who died in the two provinces were all 1-star and 2-star battle grandmasters. This kind of loss was really disastrous. The blue-haired youth suddenly asked, Brother Qin, how many did you lose? Qin Feiyang said, we lost 2. They both died in the sea of bitterness. Only 2? And they both died in the sea of bitterness. So, on the bridge of helplessness, the spiritual state didn't lose a single person? The blue-haired youth and the other 3 were stunned. What do you mean? We only lost 2. Does it make you feel very unbalanced? Rin Wushuang glared at the 4 of them. Xinlong and the other 2's deaths had always made her feel sad. At this moment, when she saw the reaction of the 4 of them, she couldn't help but burn with anger. Don't misunderstand. We didn't mean that. We're just curious. How did you cross the bridge of helplessness? Is there any other trick? Because most of our people died in the illusion of the bridge of helplessness. The blue-haired youth hurriedly explained. Don't think too much. There's no trick. We were able to cross the bridge of helplessness because of Brother Qin's help. Otherwise, we would definitely have suffered heavy losses like you. Lu Xingqian smiled. The blue-haired youth and the other 3 immediately looked at Qin Feiyang, their eyes shining. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and said, I was just lucky. Lucky? The 4 of them shook their heads disapprovingly. The blue-haired youth sighed and said, if we knew Brother Qin had such ability, we would have followed you shamelessly even if you didn't agree. We wouldn't have lost so many people now. Brother Qin, everyone! The blue-haired youth glanced at Qin Feiyang, then looked at Ren Wushuang and the other 2. He cupped his hands and said, how about we form an alliance? His face was full of sincerity. Qin Feiyang and the other 3 looked at each other and smiled. This was exactly what they wanted to say. We can form an alliance, but how do we divide the benefits? Qin Feiyang asked. Benefits? The blue-haired youth shook his head and laughed. He pointed to the sea ahead and said, Brother Qin, does this look like a place with treasures? Qin Feiyang said, whether there is or not, it's always good to make it clear in advance. Otherwise, it will hurt our friendship. Okay, if we really encounter any treasures, we'll divide them equally. How about it? The blue-haired youth said with a helpless expression. He felt that Qin Feiyang was a little superfluous. Okay, Qin Feiyang nodded. After that, both sides introduced themselves and steered the small boats forward side by side. The blue-haired youth from Yu State was called Ling Yu. The woman was called Feng Ranran. The valiant woman from Feng State was called Zhao Yu. The other woman was called Luo Dan. According to the 4 of them, before the 9 provinces' Great War began, the people from the 2 provinces had already sparred in advance. Later, seeing that the strength of both sides was not bad, they formed an alliance. In other words, before entering the 9 Nether Yellow Springs, Yu State and Feng State had already formed an alliance. It was no wonder that when Ling Yu was trying to break through to the 3-star war grandmaster, Zhao Yu and the others from Feng State would help protect him. From this point, it also reflected that the people from the 2 provinces were still trustworthy. Time flew by. Another half a month passed. Qin Feiyang and the others had been sailing on the Sea of Bitterness for more than a month. During this period, they encountered more than a dozen small boats returning. This also meant that more than a dozen people had died in the Sea of Bitterness. Dong Zhengyang sighed. I wonder how many people will return alive in the end. Ling Yu said, Brother Dong, I'm afraid no one dares to answer this question. That's right. Although there are 50 spots to enter the imperial capital, according to my understanding, there are no more than 20 people who enter the imperial capital in the previous years. Lu Xingqian said, "It was fine if the two of them didn't speak, but once they did, everyone's mood seemed a little low. Look, there's someone in front." Suddenly, Rin Wushuang exclaimed. Everyone raised their heads, and their pupils immediately contracted. There was indeed a person standing on the sea in front of them, but because it was too far away, they couldn't see it clearly. However, they could clearly see that there was no boat under that person's feet. He was standing on the sea, out of thin air. What's going on? The 8 of them were extremely surprised. Qin Feiyang said, "Slow down, be careful." Immediately, everyone withdrew their battle qi and drove towards that person at a walking speed. The distance was getting closer and closer. 400 meters, 300 meters, 200 meters, 150 meters. Finally, the 8 of them saw the person's true appearance, and they couldn't help but feel their scalps go numb. That person was wearing a blood-red robe. His long hair, eyes, and skin were all blood-red, and there was even blood flowing from his body. This blood was the seawater of the Sea of Bitterness. Moreover, he was really standing on thin air, without any support under his feet. Qin Feiyang said in a low voice, "He should be the blood puppet recorded on the stone tablet. Quickly, take a detour." This person was about 8 meters tall and had regular facial features. Overall, he gave off an extraordinary aura, and it could be seen that he was one of the best in a province when he was alive. However, at this moment, he had become a killing machine in the Sea of Bitterness. Dong Jingyang and the others nodded and immediately steered the boat beside Qin Feiyang. They took a detour, maintaining a distance of more than 100 meters from the blood puppet. The blood puppet didn't stop them. It just stared at them, and its blood-red eyes revealed a ruthless coldness. Roar! However, just as they were about to take a detour, the blood puppet suddenly opened its mouth and roared like a beast. Immediately after, it began to run on the sea of blood, and its target was Qin Feiyang and the others. It can actually run on the surface of the sea. Qin Feiyang and the others were dumbfounded. The valiant woman Zhao Yu said, "I'll deal with it. You guys pay attention to the surroundings. There may be other blood puppets. Let me test its strength." Qin Feiyang pointed his index finger in the air, and an invisible force suddenly roared out. Wherever it passed, it set off a huge wave that was several feet high. However, just as the invisible energy was about to hit the blood puppet flickered and easily dodged the attack, continuing to charge towards Qin Feiyang and the others. So fast, the 8 of them were shocked. Boom! The blood puppet rushed over and punched Zhao Yu because Zhao Yu was the closest to it. The terrifying force was earth-shattering, and for a moment the boat under their feet was like a leaf in the wind, shaking wildly. They hurriedly activated their battle aura and condensed a battle aura boundary to stop the blood waves. However, they were shocked to find that the water in the Sea of Bitterness could actually erode their battle aura. A battle aura boundary could only last for 3 breaths at most. "Get rid of it quickly," Lu Xingqian shouted at Zhao Yu. "Get rid of it immediately." Zhao Yu's eyes were cold. With a wave of her hand, sword energy surged, and a 3-foot-long sword instantly appeared out of thin air. A person who has lost his mind should obediently go to hell and become a ghost. Sacred sword judgment. Immediately. Chapter 651. Dong. Then, the blood puppet fell into the blood sea and was drowned by the seawater. It's just SOO. Zhao Yu clapped his hands disdainfully. Qin Feiyang and the others heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, these blood puppets were not very strong. Otherwise, they would have had a hard battle. Dong! But the next moment, the sea around them exploded and huge waves rolled. Streaks of blood-red silhouettes burst out from the huge waves and landed on the surface of the sea. So many. The 8 of them looked ahead and to their left and right. Their expressions were extremely ugly. There were 10 blood puppets in front of them. There were 5 blood puppets on each side. There were 20 of them in total. There were also blood puppets behind them, but they could not turn around, so there was no way to know how many there were behind them. There were men and women among these blood puppets, and they all looked young and extraordinary. They must have been the strongest of the younger generation in the 9 prefectures when they were alive, just like the first blood puppet. Qin Feiyang said, "We can't continue fighting." Ling Yu and the others nodded. There were so many blood puppets. Once they started fighting, it would take a lot of time, and it would undoubtedly be more difficult to catch up with the people in front. Most importantly, they could not turn around to check the blood puppets behind them. Once they attacked from behind, it would be impossible to guard against them. Boom! There was no hesitation. Waves of aura erupted as everyone began to perform their strongest battle techniques. But Lu Xingqian did not make a move. He only glanced coldly at the blood puppets, as if it had nothing to do with him. Ultimate destruction. Divine demon seal. Soul-breaking sword. In the blink of an eye, the 7 battle techniques appeared in the sky, shining brightly with a monstrous aura. Roar! At the same time, the surrounding blood puppets roared like wild beasts and pounced toward Qin Feiyang and the others. But Qin Feiyang and the others ignored the blood puppets on their left, right, and rear. Their eyes were fixed on the 10 blood puppets in front of them. Kill! The few of them shouted in unison. The 7 battle techniques were like beasts pouncing on their prey. The 3 blood puppets at the front were instantly smashed into pieces. "Let's go," Qin Feiyang shouted. The group of people immediately drove the small boat, following behind the 8 great war arts, as fast as lightning. The combat strength of everyone present was quite impressive. In particular, the 4 of them were all 3-star combat grandmasters. With their battle arts, they could even fight a 6-star combat grandmaster. Judging from their strength, these blood puppets weren't any weaker than them. However, they hadn't used any battle arts since the beginning, which meant that they had already forgotten the battle arts they had learned when they were alive. Without a battle art, how could he be a match for them? Wherever the 7 great battle arts went, it could be said that they crushed everything in their path. In less than 3 breaths, the blood puppets in front of him were reduced to ashes. The 8 of them steered the small boat and fled without looking back. In fact, they also wanted to turn around and take a look because they could feel that the blood puppets were chasing after them. However, they did not have the guts to do so. "Feiyang, it's me, Uncle Yuan. I'm behind you, and I'm being attacked by blood puppets. Don't leave me behind." "Wushuang, it's Grandpa. Please save Grandpa." At this moment, the illusions that had tormented them appeared again. Dong Xingyang roared, "Damn it, can't you do something else?" "Calm down. If you want to live, no matter who you hear, you can't turn around." Qin Feiyang roared. Dong Xingyang suddenly shivered, and cold sweat broke out all over his body. Before Jiang Wei died, it was because he was too angry and irritable that he lost his mind and lost his life. If it wasn't for Qin Feiyang's reminder, he would have followed in Jiang Wei's footsteps. Just thinking about it made him afraid. Zhao Yu and the other 3 looked at Dong Xingyang and then at Qin Feiyang. They had always been curious as to why Dong Xingyang and the other 2 were able to survive until now. One had to know. Dong Xingyang was only a 1-star combat grandmaster. Ren Wushuang was also only a 1-star combat grandmaster. As for Lu Xingqian, he was still hiding his cultivation. In their eyes, he was just an unremarkable war emperor. How could these 3 people reach the sea of bitterness? It turned out that it was because Qin Feiyang was constantly reminding them. In other words, although on the surface, Ren Wushuang was the captain, Qin Feiyang was the real core. At the same time, a few miles in front of Qin Feiyang and the others, crash! On the surface of the sea, The waves were turbulent. More than 20 small boats flew past. Behind them, there was also a group of blood puppets. Among these people, there were a few familiar faces to Qin Feiyong. One of them was Tan Wu. The others were Mo Wuxian, Yan Tianfeng, Pei Sanshi, and Lu Yinfeng. The others had the words Kuan and Chang embroidered on their chests. They were obviously from Kuan Prefecture and Changzhou. And among the people from these two prefectures, there were two people who were particularly eye-catching. They were two young men. They looked to be around 25 or 26 years old. One of them had a head of golden hair, while the other had a head of long green hair. Both of them were tall and straight, and their temperaments were extraordinary. Although these blood puppets are strong, they have all forgotten their battle techniques and are no threat to us. As long as there are no other changes, we will definitely be the first to reach the other side. The golden-haired man stood at the head of the bridge with a confident smile on his face. Of course. As long as we join forces, what can stop us in the 9 nether yellow springs? The green-haired youth said proudly. Mo Wuxian looked at the two of them and said, "Don't forget, there's still Qin Feiyong from the spirit state. This person is not an ordinary person. If you are careless, you will definitely suffer great loss." The golden-haired youth and the green-haired youth looked at each other with disdain in their eyes. Mo Wuxian, don't brag about Qin Feiyong to the heavens. Our Kuan Prefecture and Changzhou are not something your Yinzhou can compare to. Fortunately, Qin Feiyong didn't meet us. Otherwise, we would definitely beat him up until he knelt down and begged for mercy. Isn't that right? What can a small war emperor do? Even if he broke through to the war master level, in our eyes, he is just a trash with an undeserved reputation. The people from Kuan Prefecture and Changzhou all sneered. Mo Wuxian frowned slightly, as if he was unhappy with the arrogance of these people. However, a smile appeared on his face, and he said, "Yes, no matter how strong Qin Feiyong is, how can he be compared to you?" The golden-haired youth smiled and said, "That's right. Since we have formed an alliance, let's not talk about others and destroy our own." Yes, it's my fault." Mo Wuxian nodded, but a light flashed in the depths of his eyes. He smiled and said, "Since we have formed an alliance, shouldn't you guys help me, your ally?" "Of course we should help. Although your strength is not that great, you are still the direct disciple of the Yunzhou Prefecture Master. Even if you don't give face to the monk, you still have to give face to the Buddha, right? Tell us, what do you want us to help you with?" The golden-haired youth laughed with a hint of contempt in his words. "I'll let you be proud first." Mo Wuxian sneered secretly and said, "Qin Feiyong killed my brother when he entered Yunzhou. This time, I must let him die in the 9 nether underworld and avenge my brother. That's simple. As long as we reach the other side first, even if he doesn't die in the sea of bitterness, I won't allow him to set foot on the other side." The golden-haired youth said. The green-haired youth smiled and said, "I also want to meet this Qin Feiyong. I want to see if his reputation is undeserved, or does he deserve it?" Mo Wuxian cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Then I'll thank the two of you first." The two of them smiled and ignored Mo Wuxian. At the same time, Tan Wu looked at the three of them with a hint of mockery in his eyes. He had personally experienced Qin Feiyong's means. He was simply a fiend. It was already good enough that he didn't come looking for trouble, but he actually took the initiative to provoke him. He really didn't know what to do. However, he couldn't be bothered to remind them. On the one hand, these people might not listen even if he reminded them. On the other hand, he was also very happy to see these insensible people fall. "Look, what's that over there?" Suddenly, a cry of surprise sounded. Tan Wu looked up suspiciously, and his eyes were immediately filled with bewilderment. At the end of the left front, there was a blurry outline. That outline was huge and towered into the clouds. Moreover, One could sense a majestic aura from afar. The golden-haired youth shouted, "Go over and take a look!" More than 20 small boats immediately changed direction and swept towards the left front. As they got closer, the outline became clearer. More than 10 breaths later, everyone finally saw the outline's true appearance. It was actually a stone staircase. The stone staircase was blood red and slanted upwards. Every step was neat as one, like a staircase to heaven that reached the clouds. But the strange thing was that there was no support at the bottom of the stone staircase, giving people the feeling that it was floating on the sea. However, beside the stone staircase, there was a huge stone tablet floating on the sea. This stone tablet was more than 100 meters tall and was also blood red, as if it was cast from fresh blood and suffused with an icy luster. And when the people present looked at the stone tablet, ecstasy immediately appeared on their faces, because there were 2 big words engraved on the stone tablet, Permitha, like iron hooks and silver strokes. It emitted a terrifying aura that made one's heart palpitate. This is the Permitha. We've finally reached the Permitha. After a moment of silence, everyone cheered. As long as they climbed that stone staircase, they would obtain the qualifications to enter the imperial capital. The imperial capital, in the eyes of all the living beings in the 9 prefectures, that was the holy capital that they all dreamed of going to. Hurry! Everyone drove the small boats and crazily rushed towards the stone staircase. At the same time, on the distant sea, 8 small boats sped over. It was Qin Feiyang and the others. Although they were several kilometers away from Tan Wu and the others, they had been driving the small boats at full speed all along the way in order to avoid the blood puppets' pursuit. And the small boats' current moving speed was comparable to their flying speed. Thus, the distance of a few kilometers was nothing to him, and at this moment, they also saw the outline of the Permitha. But like Tan Wu and the others, they did not know what it was at first. Therefore, they were exceptionally careful at this moment. Damn, so many blood puppets. As the distance continued to shrink, they could clearly see the group of blood puppets that were chasing Tan Wu and the others, and their expressions could not help but change. Ling Yu hurriedly said, "Quickly take a detour. Don't bump into them." Chapter 652. Don't take a detour. Qin Feiyang shook his head. Why? Ling Yu looked at him in confusion. Qin Feiyang said, "Then answer me first. What are those blood puppets chasing?" Ling Yu frowned. "Do you still need to ask?" "Of course they're chasing someone." "That's right. The people from Hezhou, Kuin, Changzhou, and Yunzhou are all ahead of us. Therefore, the people that the blood puppets are chasing are definitely them. In other words, we've already caught up with them." Qin Feiyang said, "Yes, but because of this we should take a detour, because only by avoiding the blood puppets in front of us can we really overtake them." Ling Yu said, "You're right, but you ignored the direction those blood puppets are going. See, they're all going for that silhouette. And these blood puppets are chasing Mo Wuxian and the others. If they went there, Mo Wuxian and the others must have gone there too. I'm guessing that the real body of that silhouette is definitely not ordinary." Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed. Ling Yu's pupils shrank. He looked up at the silhouette, and his face was full of surprise. Zhao Yu glanced at Qin Feiyang and said, "Ling Yu will do as Brother Qin says." Ling Yu nodded and looked at Qin Feiyang. "Brother Qin, please give us your orders." In terms of intelligence, he admitted that he was indeed not as smart as Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang said, "There's nothing to give. Just be prepared for battle at any time." "Understood." Everyone nodded. Splash! The 8 boats suddenly turned into sharp arrows, breaking through the waves. Mo Wuxian and the others were only 200 meters away from the other shore. It could be said that they were very close. Everyone was wild with joy. 200 meters, 150 meters, 100 meters. But just as they entered the range of 100 meters, the faces of the 5 people at the front suddenly twisted. Then, the 5 of them turned around at the same time. The next moment, following a series of painful screams, the 5 people exploded one after another. The small boat under his feet immediately turned back. What happened? The people behind all stopped in unison and looked at the 5 returning boats in bewilderment. The golden-haired youth looked at Lu Yunfeng and Pei Sancher and said, "You two go take a look." The 2 of them raised their eyebrows. The golden-haired youth shouted impatiently, "Go now, or don't blame me for being ruthless." A vicious aura immediately rose between the brows of Lu Yunfeng and the other 2. Wasn't this clearly asking them to be cannon fodder? Mo Wuxian transmitted his voice. "We are alone and weak. We can't go against them. Hurry up and be careful." The 2 of them looked at Mo Wuxian gloomily. On the surface, Mo Wuxian seemed to be concerned about them, but in reality he was harboring evil intentions. They knew that both Mo Wuxian and Yan Tianfeng wanted to get rid of them. Needless to say, the blood puppet had caught up. The green-haired youth shouted, "We can't care about that anymore. Let's go." Immediately, the group of people steered the boat and braced themselves as they headed towards the stone stairs. But just as they entered the range of 100 meters, all the boats stopped. Each of them had a ferocious look on their faces as they struggled frantically. In the blink of an eye, another 4 people turned their heads and exploded to death, adding Lu Yunfeng and Pei Sancher, as well as the 5 people who died at the beginning. 11 people had already died, and these 11 people were all war masters. However, the blood puppets did not chase after them, but they did not retreat either. They blocked behind Tan Wu and the others, clearly wanting to cut off their retreat. At the same time, Qin Feiyang and the others, who were flying over, also saw the stone stairs that led to the clouds. And when the 2 words Higgin entered their sight, the 8 of them were overjoyed. Dong Xingyang said excitedly, "We're finally here. Quick, catch up now. Maybe we can still make it in time." After enduring for so long, he finally saw Higgin. He had almost forgotten about everything. Qin Feiyang glanced at the stone stairs, then at the stone tablet, and then at the blood puppets in front of him. Suddenly, he noticed that there were more than a dozen boats floating towards them. However, because there were too many blood puppets blocking his line of sight, he could not see the situation of Tan Wu and the others, but his intuition told him that something was happening in front of him. At this moment, Dong Xingyang and the others had already steered the boat forward. Qin Feiyang's expression changed, and he immediately steered the boat to chase after them, at the same time shouting, "Stop! Higgin is right in front of us. Why are we stopping?" Zhao Yu said without turning his head. "Didn't you see those boats floating over? There are more than a dozen boats. In other words, more than a dozen people have already lost their lives. It must be very dangerous ahead. Don't be rash." Qin Feiyang said angrily. Hearing this, Dong Xingyang and the others glanced at the sea, and when they saw the dozen boats, they suddenly shuddered and hurriedly braked. Qin Feiyang caught up with them and said in a deep voice, "If you continue to be so impulsive, I won't care about your life or death. I'm sorry. We were wrong." Whether it was Dong Xingyang and the other 2, or Ling Yu and the other 3, they all looked ashamed and apologized to Qin Feiyang. Suddenly, 2 desperate screams came from afar. The 8 of them looked up, their eyes full of surprise and doubt. Qin Feiyang's eyes were solemn, and he said, "Without a doubt, it's not that easy to reach Higgin. Be careful." Dong Xingyang and the others nodded. "Let's go." Qin Feiyang waved his hand, and the 8 of them once again steered the boat and sailed in that direction. Roar! The blood puppet that was chasing them from behind suddenly roared angrily. Immediately, The blood puppets behind Tan Wu and the others all turned their heads in an instant and looked at Qin Feiyang and the others. Damn it! Qin Feiyang and the others' faces darkened. They didn't know how many blood puppets were behind them, but there were more than 50 blood puppets in front of them. Roar! The 50 blood puppets immediately rushed toward Qin Feiyang and the others, and their roars shook the sky and the earth. What should we do? Dong Zhenyan looked at Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang looked at Lu Xingqian and said, "Shouldn't you also make a move? We can't always let Ling Yu and the other 3 do it." Everyone looked at Lu Xingqian in surprise. How would I dare to disobey Brother Qin's orders? Lu Xingqian smiled, raised his hand and pointed in the air, and a giant storm suddenly appeared out of thin air. Those wind blades emitted the power to destroy the world. At the same time, his aura was like a rainbow, as if a god had descended to the world. What a powerful aura! What a terrifying battle art! Lu Xingqian, you're actually a 3-star war grandmaster. Dong Zhengyang and Ren Wushuang were dumbstruck. Ling Yu and the other 2 were also shocked. And according to their judgment, the battle art that Lu Xingqian was using now was also a perfect battle art. Lu Xingqian smiled faintly and said, "I don't think I've ever admitted that I'm a 7-star war emperor." Woo-woo! Crash! After he finished speaking, he waved his hand, and the giant storm whistled toward the blood puppets in front. Wherever it passed, the sea rolled and waves of blood surged. Those blood puppets were like rotten wood, unable to withstand a single blow, and a large number of them were instantly obliterated. In just 2 blinks of an eye, the giant storm forcibly tore a hole in it. Ling Yu and the other 3 looked at each other. They never thought that there would be such a terrifying expert hidden in the spiritual state. "Now is not the time to be distracted. Let's go," Qin Feiyang shouted. The 8 of them steered the small boat and followed behind the giant storm, advancing rapidly. In less than 10 breaths, the 8 of them rushed out of the encirclement. But when they saw the current situation of Tan Wu and the others, their faces were full of shock and bewilderment. What were these people doing? Chapter 653. Qin Feiyang waved his hand and said, "Something's wrong. Stop." The 8 boats immediately stopped in unison. At this moment, they were only 50 to 60 meters away from the 100-meter range. The other shore is right in front of us. Any normal person wouldn't stop here, unless there are other factors. But we can't see their expressions. It's hard to tell. Lu Xingqian frowned. "I can't take it. I'd rather die." Suddenly, a person from Kuinzhou howled and turned around. Naturally, the outcome was that he exploded and died. The moment this person turned around, Qin Feiyang and the others captured his expression. His twisted face was filled with pain. His blood-red eyes were filled with despair. Ren Wushuang said, "Could it be an illusion?" "It shouldn't be. Illusions would appear at any time on our way here. They must be the same. But they were able to come here alive, which means that their willpower is not weak. How could they be confused by illusions at this last step?" Zhao Yu said, "Roar." The blood puppets behind them approached step by step. Qin Feiyang said, "We can't delay any longer. No matter what, we can only move forward." But before he finished speaking, an angry roar suddenly exploded. "What can mere illusions do to me?" The one who shouted was Tan Wu. At the same time, the boat under his feet finally moved and sailed toward the other shore. "It's really an illusion." Zhao Yu's gaze trembled. Dong Zhengyang said in a deep voice, "And this illusion is very unusual. Otherwise, so many people wouldn't have died here. Those illusions before were just appetizers. This is where the real test is. Are you all ready?" Qin Feiyang glanced at the 7 of them. The 7 of them nodded heavily. It wasn't easy to get here. They definitely couldn't fall here. "Let's go." Qin Feiyang waved his hand. The 8 of them drove the boat and rushed into the 100-meter range. Immediately, like Tan Wu and the others, the boat stopped in unison. All kinds of tempting voices turned into a terrifying sound wave and poured into their minds. His face and eyes were filled with pain and struggle. Just as the 8 of them entered the forbidden area, the golden-haired young man and the green-haired young man roared and broke free from the illusion one after another. However, when they saw that Tan Wu actually woke up before them, a trace of viciousness immediately crept up between their brows. Tan Wu, the first person to reach the other side, must be us. Stop right there, the golden-haired young man shouted, his eyes filled with killing intent. Tan Wu ignored them and stared at Hagen with a burning gaze. I told you to stop, didn't you hear me? The murderous aura between the golden-haired young man's eyebrows became even thicker. Humph! Tan Wu gave a cold snort and turned a deaf ear. Break! At this moment, Mo Wuxin's roar sounded out, and he also woke up and immediately steered the small boat towards the opposite shore. Back to Qin Feiyang. At this moment, his hands were tightly clenched, and his face was distorted. Sweat was dripping down his forehead like rain. This was because the voices of countless people were echoing in his head. There was his mother's voice, it was Uncle Yuan's voice, there was Ling Yunfei's voice, it was Luo Qingzhu's voice, it was Jiang Jingyi's voice, and the voices of Ma Hongmei, and old monster Lu, and Dongzhen. In short, whether it was his relatives, friends, or enemies who had died in his hands, they were all talking behind his back at this moment. Some people said that they missed him. Some people said that they wanted to kill him. There were also people who said that they wanted to take his life. Moreover, some voices sounded in his ears. He could even clearly feel the hot air coming out of the mouths of those people who were talking. It was as if there was really someone behind him. Qin Feiyang also finally understood now why Tan Wu and the rest would stop here. Because the illusion here was too real. It was no exaggeration to say that the illusions he had experienced on the way were not even 1/10,000th of the illusions here. Your Highness, is the outside world fun? Do you want to return to the imperial capital? Unfortunately, you are no longer the 14th prince. You are now just a dog that no one wants. You will never be able to return to the imperial capital. Ha ha! Suddenly, the voices in his ears changed and turned into mocking laughter. Wild laughter. The appearance of these voices caused Qin Feiyang's murderous aura to soar, because the owners of these voices were the people who had hurt him in the imperial capital. He was going crazy with hatred. His nails had already sunk into his skin, and blood was flowing, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. The last bit of reason he had told him that he absolutely could not turn back. Suddenly, a monstrous, murderous aura rushed out of his body. His black hair fluttered as he roared towards the sky. I swear, I will kill all of you with my own hands and make you regret it. With this roar, all the voices in his ears suddenly disappeared. Who? At this moment, Qin Feiyang's body went soft as he half knelt in the boat. Sweat dripped like raindrops and he panted like an ox. It was really dangerous just now, and he almost lost his mind. However, it was also thanks to the voices of those people just now, because it was these voices that had completely stimulated the hatred in his heart and his unyielding will, which allowed him to get rid of the illusion. This is Qin Feiyang's voice? At the same time, hearing Qin Feiyang's roar, Tan Wu and Mo Wuxin's eyes trembled, as they were all confused by the illusion and could not turn back. Only now did they know that Qin Feiyang had also rushed over. And from the sound, Qin Feiyang seemed to have gotten rid of the illusion. Immediately, Tan Wu's eyes became playful. Once this fiend arrived, there would definitely be a good show to watch. But Mo Wuxin's eyes were filled with killing intent. He absolutely could not let this person reach the other shore. He looked at the blonde youth in front of him and transmitted his voice. The two of you, that roar, just now was Qin Feiyang. You have to keep your word. Don't worry, with us here. he can forget about reaching the other shore. And Tan Wu, he will definitely die today. A cruel smile crept onto their faces after a short period of calm. Qin Feiyang finally recovered. He got up and looked at Mo Wuxian and the rest, frowning slightly. Then, he looked at Tan Wu, who was about to reach the shore, and a smile crept into his eyes. To be honest, Tan Wu was the first to reach the other shore, which was somewhat beyond his expectations. But it could also be seen that this person's willpower was very terrifying. So the more he looked at this person, the more satisfied he was. He must take him under his command. At this moment, the boat under Tan Wu's feet finally reached the shore. Seeing this, the blonde youth was immediately anxious and said angrily, "Tan Wu, do you really not want to live anymore?" "Whether I want to live or not, it's not up to you," Tan Wu mocked without turning his head, and then walked to the bow of the boat without hesitation. "The other shore, I'm here." He looked up at the long stone stairs and muttered to himself. He decisively lifted his foot and stepped onto the first step of the stone stairs. Damn it! The blonde youth's face was as dark as water. "Want to kill me? Follow me," Tan Wu said without even turning his head. Then he dashed up the stone stairs. Qin Feiyang glanced at the blonde youth with a hint of ridicule in his eyes. Actually, it was not very important whether he was the first to reach the other shore or not. Anyway, as long as he could enter the imperial capital, it was fine. And the reason why these two people were so eager to be first was purely because of vanity. Because, if they could be the first to reach the other shore, then they would have the capital to show off in the future. But what was certain was that Tan Wu had completely angered these two people. A bloody battle was inevitable later. Qin Feiyang retracted his gaze and looked at Run Wushuang and the rest. The few of them were not awake yet. How could he help them? He lowered his head and pondered. At this time, the blonde youth, the green-haired youth, and Mo Wuxian also stepped onto the stone stairs one after another. Their boat also immediately turned around and returned the way they came. But after the three of them stepped onto the stone stairs, they did not chase after Tan Wu immediately. The blonde youth frowned and said, "Do you guys think we can turn back now?" "I don't know." The green-haired youth shook his head. The blonde youth pondered for a moment and said, "Mo Wuxian, turn back and try." "Me." Mo Wuxian's face immediately turned green. "What? Do you want to die? Do you believe that I'll kick you down now?" The blonde youth's eyes flashed. "Mo Wuxian, you have to be sure that you can turn back first before we can help you deal with Qin Feiyang. If we can't turn back, how can we deal with him? So, don't hesitate, lest you really get kicked into the sea of bitterness. At that time, there will be no hope," the green-haired youth said with a smile. Mo Wuxian was furious. If he had known earlier, he would not have colluded with these two people. But it was too late to regret now. "I'll count to 3. If you don't turn back, then don't be ruthless," the blonde youth sneered. 3, 2, 1. The golden-haired youth was counting slowly, but in Mo Wuxian's ears, it was like a talisman that hastened his death. Just as he counted to 1, Mo Wuxian gritted his teeth, closed his eyes, and suddenly turned around, his face filled with nervousness and panic. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, until 10 breaths passed. Mo Wuxian did not show any signs of exploding. He slowly opened his eyes. Seeing that he was unharmed, he was immediately overjoyed and said, "I can turn back." The blonde youth was also overjoyed and immediately turned to look at the sea of bitterness. "After more than a month, this is the first time we turn back to enjoy the scenery of the sea of bitterness." The blonde youth laughed. "Yes," the green-haired youth nodded, and then asked, "Mo Wuxian, who is Qin Feiyang?" "He is." Mo Wuxian pointed at Qin Feiyang, who was in deep thought with his head lowered, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. The two looked over and sized up Qin Feiyang for a moment, and a trace of disdain appeared in their eyes. "Isn't he just a 1-star battle ancestor? What's the big deal?" Killing him is as easy as waving my hand. But isn't he awake? Why hasn't he come up? The blonde youth said with disdain, and then asked suspiciously. And Mo Wuxian thought for a moment and said, "This person is a very emotional person. He should be trying to help his companions." So childish. The two of them shook their heads mockingly, and Mo Wuxian glanced at the two of them, and there was a trace of worry in his eyes. The two of them were too arrogant. If they did not quickly get rid of Qin Feiyang, they would definitely suffer a great loss in the end. His eyes flashed slightly, and he laughed. "The two of you, in order to prevent any accidents, why don't we kill him now?" "Good idea. We have already left the sea of bitterness and can kill him freely. But his hands and feet are tied on the small boat." The two of them laughed very brightly, and Mo Wuxian also laughed. "Then what are we waiting for? Let's end his dog life." Boom! Immediately. Chapter 654. Qin Feiyang suddenly raised his head and looked at Mo Wuxian and the other two. Mo Wuxian laughed. "Qin Feiyang, as long as you kneel down and beg me, I will let you go and let you reach the other side." Qin Feiyang laughed and said, "You think you are qualified to make me kneel?" He could not do such a thing that hurt his self-esteem. Moreover, even if he really knelt down, Mo Wuxian would not let him go. Stubborn. Mo Wuxian shook his head, and with a clang, a blood blade appeared above his head, emitting a shocking sharpness. At the same time, the two also raised their arms, battle chi surging at their fingertips, and a terrifying aura spread out. Qin Feiyang looked at the two and frowned. "I have no enmity with you. Why do you want to help Mo Wuxian deal with me?" "Yes, there is indeed no enmity between us, but we have always liked to kill geniuses. I heard that you, Qin Feiyang, are not only talented in cultivation, but also in alchemy, so killing you personally will definitely be very satisfying." The two laughed. "Aren't you afraid of going for wool and coming home shorn?" Qin Feiyang's eyes turned cold. These two were not only vain, but also self-righteous. You are now a fish on the chopping board, at our mercy, do you know that?" The two of them chuckled, their expressions full of disdain. "What about your companions?" Qin Feiyang pointed at Yan Tianfeng and the others. If Mo Wuxian and the other two really made a move at this moment, these people would definitely suffer. But just as he finished asking, Qin Feiyang laughed at himself. Back in the Spirit Cloud Mountain, Yan Tianfeng and Pan Wen joined forces to kill Mo Wuxian, and Mo Wuxian had long held a grudge in his heart. So why would he care about Yan Tianfeng's life? Even if he was not here today, Mo Wuxian would not let Yan Tianfeng reach the other side. As for the two, although he did not know much about them, from the previous conversation, he could already tell that the two were selfish people. In short, in their eyes, they only cared about themselves, and everyone else was a pawn, cannon fodder. True enough. Hearing what Qin Feiyang said, the three of them all had smiles on their faces. Evidently, they were mocking Qin Feiyang. "You guys are really ruthless." Qin Feiyang shook his head. "Alas, could it be that you understand that those who achieve great things have to be ruthless? For someone as naive and childish as you, no matter how talented you are, it will be difficult for you to achieve great things." The golden-haired young man sighed, feeling rather regretful. Qin Feiyang glanced at the three of them, his eyes filled with disgust. In fact, the reason he said so much nonsense was to stall for time, because it was just as Mo Wuxian and the other two had said, he couldn't move freely on the small boat. Of course, if Mo Wuxian was alone, he wouldn't have cared. Even if Mo Wuxian was a 2-star battle master now, with his methods, he could easily kill him. However, the auras emitted by the blonde and green-haired youth were comparable to Lu Xingchen. It could be seen that they were both 3-star war masters. 2 3-star war sect teaming up, in addition to Mo Wuxian. This was a bit unbearable. However, the most important thing was still Ren Wuxuang. He didn't care about Lu Xingqian and Dong Jingyang. He also didn't care about the lives of Ling Yu and the other three. However, he couldn't ignore Ren Wuxuang. Ren Wuxuang hadn't woken up yet. Once they started fighting, he would definitely suffer. Glancing at Ren Wuxuang, Qin Feiyang still wanted to stall for time, but the three of them didn't give him a chance. To be exact, the three of them had seen through his goal. After all, the three of them weren't stupid. Boom! The three great battle arts attacked. This place was instantly filled with surging waves. Qin Feiyang and the others' boat was violently shaking in the bloody waves, as if it could be submerged at any time. What should we do? Qin Feiyang's eyes flickered. Abruptly, he gritted his teeth and activated the battle art. He raised his hand and waved it in the air. An invisible force roared out and pounced towards the three great battle arts. Boom! The invisible force collided with the three great battle arts in the air, and a terrifying destructive wave was suddenly born. Qin Feiyang's body trembled, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. Although he was severely injured, he was able to withstand it with the protection of the battle art. However, the bloody waves on the sea were even more turbulent, reaching a height of more than 10 meters. This was the problem that Qin Feiyang was worried about. Once they fought with all their strength, even if they weren't killed by Mo Wuxian and the other two, they would be swallowed by the bloody waves and fall into a sea of suffering. However, Mo Wuxian and the other two didn't have to worry about this, because no matter how high the bloody waves were, they just had to retreat to a higher place on the stone stairs. On the sea, the bloody waves covered the sky and pounced towards Qin Feiyang and the others. If they couldn't think of a way, even the gods wouldn't be able to save them. Suddenly, Qin Feiyang had a plan in his mind. However, this plan was really risky. It could even be said that there was a slim chance of survival. But now, it seemed that there was no other choice but to gamble. Whoosh! Without the slightest hesitation, Qin Feiyang leaped and actually landed on Ren Wuxuang's small boat. Seeing this, Mo Wuxian and the other two were stunned. Was this guy crazy? Didn't he know that he was digging his own grave? Because the stone tablet clearly recorded that the boat could only carry one person. If there was one more person, the boat would immediately sink to the bottom of the sea. And this point was immediately confirmed. When Qin Feiyang landed on the boat immediately sank to the bottom of the sea. Moreover, Qin Feiyang's own boat also turned around and floated away. In other words, he had no way out now. He could either find a way to reach the shore or fall into the sea of suffering. The former was obviously impossible, because Mo Wuxian and the other two wouldn't allow him to reach the shore. Moreover, even if the three of them didn't stop him, Qin Feiyang couldn't reach the shore without being able to fly. Therefore, only the latter was left, falling into the sea of suffering. But at this time, Qin Feiyang didn't panic at all. He waved his hand and directly sent Ren Wuxuang to the castle. Then, without hesitation, he jumped onto Dong Jingyang's boat and sent Dong Jingyang to the castle. Stupid! The blonde youth sneered. In order to save others, he didn't care about his own safety. How stupid! There's no other way. He's such a stupid person. Mo Wuxian shook his head and smiled. But this is good too. We don't have to do anything. He will fall into the sea of suffering himself. The green-haired youth smiled. In the blink of an eye, just as the three of them were talking, Qin Feiyang saved Lu Xingqian and then looked at Zhao Yu and the other three. Since there was no way out, he might as well save them all. He jumped onto the four people's boats and sent them to the castle. After saving the four people, he stopped. The boat under his feet was sinking rapidly. He didn't save Yan Tianfeng and the others because their life and death had nothing to do with him. He looked up at Mo Wuxian and the other two. Mo Wuxian smiled and said, "You are only one step away from reaching the other shore. Are you unwilling now?" "Yes, I can't accept it." Qin Feiyang didn't deny it. falling into the sea of suffering was a foregone conclusion. He didn't have the slightest confidence that he could escape alive. Maybe, in the end, he would become an emotionless blood puppet. Or maybe he would be trapped in the castle and never be able to return to the capital and see his mother. I understand. If it were me, I would have gone crazy. But this kind of thing will never happen to me. In your next life, remember to open your eyes. Don't provoke people you can't afford to provoke. Mo Wuxian laughed and looked down at Qin Feiyong with the attitude of a victor. I will remember. Please remember too. Qin Feiyong's eyes narrowed slightly. A cold glint burst forth from his eyes. Then he went to the ancient castle. Splash! The boat also sank to the bottom of the sea. And Yen Tianfeng and the others from Quanzhou and Changzhou were all swallowed by the blood waves. When the sea returned to calm, the blond youth retracted his gaze and turned to Mo Wuxian and said, "Are you happy now?" "Yes, thank you. But forgive me for being blunt, but by helping me, you are actually helping yourselves. Because with Qin Feiyong's talent, if he enters the capital, he will definitely pose a great threat to you." Mo Wuxian laughed. "Do I need you to say that? If not for this, would we attack him? Do you really think we are giving you face? Naive." The two looked at Mo Wuxian mockingly, and then looked up at Tan Wu on the stone stairs. Their eyes flashed coldly. "It's time to deal with that trash." The two stepped forward and chased after Tan Wu. "Who is the naive one? Let's wait and see." Mo Wuxian laughed coldly and quickly followed. "What a pity to die like this." At the same time, Tan Wu also looked down at the sea, his eyes full of regret. If Qin Feiyong did not die, he would definitely become a great person in the future. Unfortunately, he died prematurely. Then, he looked at Mo Wuxian and the other two again. Murderous intent flashed in his eyes, and then he continued to climb to the top of the stone stairs. At the same time, the ancient castle turned into a speck of dust and kept sinking to the bottom of the sea of bitterness. And the ancient castle fell into a dead silence at this moment. Whether it was Fatso and the rest or Qin Feiyong, they all had their heads lowered and their expressions were extremely ugly. "Where is this?" Suddenly, a confused murmur sounded, breaking the silence here. Qin Feiyong looked up and saw Ling Yu looking at the ancient castle suspiciously. And Lu Xingqian, Dong Jingyang, Ren Wushuang, and the other three also woke up one after another. Lu Xingqian looked around and frowned. "Brother Qin, what's going on? Why are we in your ancient castle?" "Ancient castle?" Ling Yu and the other three were surprised. Qin Feiyong said, "Unfortunately, we are now in the sea of bitterness." "What?" The few of them suddenly changed color. Qin Feiyong gave a simple and clear account of what had happened earlier. Ling Yu immediately clenched his hands and gritted his teeth. "Those three damn bastards. I will never forgive them. Is there any use in saying tough words now?" Dong Jingyang glanced at him impatiently and said, "The most important thing now is to think of a way to leave the sea of bitterness." The few of them lowered their heads and frowned, deep in thought. Lu Xingqian glanced at the few of them and said to Qin Feiyong telepathically, "Brother Qin, I haven't paid back the favor I owed you before, and now I owe you another one. When do you think I will be able to pay it back completely?" There was a faint smile on his face, as if he was not very worried about the current situation. "Then don't pay it back," Qin Feiyong said. "How can that be? What I hate the most is to owe others, especially you, Qin Feiyong." Chapter 655. Qin Feiyong looked at Lu Xingqian and frowned slightly. What was this person trying to say? Suddenly, he noticed a smile on Lu Xingqian's face and said, "Do you have a way to leave Bitter Sea?" Lu Xingqian pondered for a moment and nodded. "There is indeed a way." Qin Feiyong's eyes lit up. Lu Xingchen said, "But I have a condition." "A condition?" Qin Feiyong raised his eyebrows. "If I didn't save you, you would have become a blood puppet. Don't you think it's a bit excessive to talk about conditions with me now? That's a different matter. I will slowly repay you for saving my life in the future," Lu Xingchen said. Qin Feiyong said angrily, "You're hitting me when I'm down." "No." Lu Xingchen shook his head and smiled. "I'm negotiating with you. There's no threat. Even if you don't agree in the end, I will still take you out of Bitter Sea. But I have no obligation to help Wolf King and Fatso." Hearing this, Qin Feiyong was furious to the extreme. This was not a threat. Even an idiot would be able to tell. Qin Feiyong suppressed his anger and said in a deep voice, "Tell me, what condition?" Lu Xingchen said, "After entering the imperial capital, I need you to do something for me. As for what it is, I will tell you when the time comes." Qin Feiyong frowned. How could he agree so easily if it was so vague? Lu Xingchen looked at Qin Feiyong's expression and knew what Qin Feiyong was worried about. He said, "Don't worry, I won't let you do anything outrageous." Qin Feiyong gritted his teeth and nodded. "Okay, as long as it's not outrageous, I can agree." Lu Xingchen laughed. Brother Qin is indeed a straightforward person. "Boss, you and Lu Xingchen are exchanging flirtatious glances. Are you secretly plotting some shady business?" Fatso had been paying attention to them for a long time. "Too much nonsense." Qin Feiyong rolled his eyes at him. He looked at Lu Xingchen and said, "If you continue to dawdle, Mo Wuxian and the others might reach the top. We have to get rid of these three." Lu Xingchen's eyes flashed. With a wave of his hand, a mysterious force immediately enveloped Qin Feiyong. The next moment, Qin Feiyong felt his body lighten as he appeared in an unfamiliar place. He looked around suspiciously. This was a completely sealed, secret chamber. It was about 1,000 feet wide, but there was nothing in this vast space. Qin Feiyong asked, "Could this be your spatial divine object?" "Yes." Lu Xingchen nodded. Qin Feiyong asked suspiciously, "What about the king crocodile?" Lu Xingchen said, "It's outside the secret chamber." "What?" Qin Feiyong's eyes trembled. He said in surprise, "You mean your spatial divine object has more than one space?" "Yes, the space outside is much bigger than this." Lu Xingchen laughed. Qin Feiyong was surprised. Lu Xingchen shook his head and laughed. "Don't even think about it. I won't take you there." "Why?" Qin Feiyong was suspicious. "There are some secrets in that space that you can't know." Lu Xingchen smiled mysteriously. "Secrets?" Qin Feiyong was a little confused. What secrets could he not know? "Don't think about it. You'll never know until you see it with your own eyes." Lu Xingchen laughed and waved his hand. The void in front of him suddenly shook. Immediately after, under Qin Feiyong's surprised gaze, an image appeared in the void. In the image, there was a sea of blood with undercurrents. My spatial divine object can not only see the outside situation, but also control it to go to heaven and earth. Lu Xingchen explained, "Go to heaven and earth." Qin Feiyong suddenly felt incredulous. In fact, as far as I know, every spatial divine object can do these two things. But the strange thing is, why can't your spatial divine object? Lu Xingchen looked at him in confusion. "I don't know either." Qin Feiyong's eyes were full of confusion. Could it be that the ancient castle was of a lower grade than Lu Xingchen's spatial divine object? He shook his head, no longer thinking about these boring questions, and said, "Let's go." Even if the ancient castle was the lowest grade spatial divine object, he would cherish it like his life because it was left to him by Uncle Yuan. Lu Xingchen immediately controlled the spatial divine object and swept towards the sea. Although Qin Feiyong could not sense anything in the secret room, from the image in the void, he could see that the spatial divine object was indeed moving. About 30 breaths of time, the surface of the Sea of Bitterness appeared in the image in front of them. In other words, the spatial divine object had now left the deep sea and was floating on the surface of the sea. Lu Xingqian waved his hand, and 3 more images appeared around them. As a result, they were able to see everything that was happening around them. The stone staircase was in one of the images. Lu Xingqian immediately controlled the spatial divine object and rushed towards the stone staircase. After approaching the stone staircase, he grabbed Qin Feiyang and instantly left the spatial divine object and landed on the first step of the stone staircase. Lu Xingqian smiled and said, "Very easy, right?" Indeed. Qin Feiyang nodded and looked up at the top of the stone staircase. Mo Wuxian and the other 2 had already climbed 1/3 of the way up. As for Tan Wu, he had already climbed 2/3 of the way up. Lu Xingqian pointed to the sea in front of them and said with a smile, "Look, Wan Qiu and the others are also here." Qin Feiyang looked over and indeed saw 4 small boats on the sea 3 to 400 meters away. No, weren't there 5 of them? Why were there only 4 small boats? Qin Feiyang looked carefully and found that Feng Hua was missing from the 5. It seemed that this person had also died on the way. For a moment, Qin Feiyang could not help but feel sad. How many young talents had died in this place? Was it worth it just to enter the imperial capital? Lu Xingqian patted his shoulder and said with a smile, "Everyone has their own fate. Don't add to your sorrow. Quickly take back your ancient castle and chase after Mo Wuxian and the others." Take back the ancient castle? Qin Feiyang was taken aback and asked suspiciously, "What do you mean?" Lu Xingqian said, "Your ancient castle is still at the bottom of the sea." "What?" Qin Feiyang was surprised. "If you had directly entered my spatial divine object, then the ancient castle would definitely not have been separated from you. But just now, you entered my spatial divine object from inside the ancient castle. The ancient castle that is exposed outside is naturally still at the bottom of the sea." Lu Xingqian laughed. Qin Feiyang was suddenly enlightened. He carefully sensed that the ancient castle really wasn't in his body. Then, his mind moved slightly. Not long after, a circle of imperceptible ripples appeared on the calm surface of the sea. Qin Feiyang thought again, and a palm-sized ancient castle suddenly appeared in the void in front of him, emitting a mysterious aura. When Lu Xingqian saw the true appearance of the ancient castle, his pupils shrank slightly, and he said with a sound transmission, "Brother Qin, your ancient castle is not an ordinary object." "How do you know?" Qin Feiyang was puzzled. "I don't know either. Maybe it's a kind of intuition, or maybe it's because of the aura it emits." Lu Xingqian said. Qin Feiyang looked at the ancient castle, and also felt that the ancient castle was covered with a mysterious veil, making it difficult for people to see through it. Maybe it really is not an ordinary object. Qin Feiyang muttered, and kept the ancient castle into his glabella. Then, the 2 of them chased after Mo Wuxian and the other 2, their eyes becoming incomparably sharp. But suddenly, Lu Xingqian stopped and said with a sound transmission, "Do you want to learn from Mo Wuxian and let Wan Qiu and the others be buried in the Sea of Bitterness?" "Is that necessary?" Qin Feiyang asked. Lu Xingqian was stunned and shook his head with a smile. "Indeed, there is no need. With their current overall strength, to deal with Wan Qiu and the others, there was no need to use such despicable means." "Mo Wuxian, aren't you going to wait for us?" The 2 of them continued to rush up, and at the same time, Lu Xingqian shouted loudly. Mo Wuxian was stunned. This voice seemed a little familiar. He stopped, looked down, and his face suddenly changed and exclaimed, "How is this possible?" "What's the fuss about?" The golden-haired youth frowned, and also looked down at Qin Feiyang and the other 2, their faces full of disbelief. "They didn't die? Did they see a ghost?" The 2 of them rubbed their eyes hard and looked at Qin Feiyang and the other 2 again. They really didn't die. In their hearts, stormy waves were immediately set off. They fell into the sea of bitterness and didn't die. How did they do it? At the same time, Tan Wu, who was at the top, also stopped moving forward and looked at Qin Feiyang and the other two in surprise. Suddenly, the golden-haired youth asked, "Mo Wuxian, do they have any special treasures on them?" "Special treasures?" Mo Wuxian frowned and said, "I only know that Qin Feiyang has a space divine item that can hide in, and a dagger that can cut iron like mud. As for the other person, I don't know much. I think they were able to escape from the sea of bitterness because of Qin Feiyang's space divine item, or that dagger." The golden-haired youth's eyes were bright and full of greed. Mo Wuxian said in surprise, "What do you mean?" "Kill and steal." The golden-haired youth said word by word with a piercing, murderous intent. "No. Didn't you see the person beside Qin Feiyang? His aura is as strong as yours. I'm afraid if they fight, it will be a lose-lose situation. And Qin Feiyang's methods are also quite impressive. He's not easy to deal with." Mo Wuxian shook his head, his eyes full of worry. Previously, when they made a move against Qin Feiyang, it was because they had the advantage of time, place, and people. But now that Qin Feiyang had already come ashore, their advantage had disappeared. It would not be easy to deal with Qin Feiyang again. Lose-lose? Are you joking? So what if that person is a 3-Star Wars sect? We have 2 3-Star Wars sectas here. Could it be that we can't beat him alone? As for Qin Feiyang, a mere 1-Star Wars sect is nothing to worry about. If you're afraid, then scram. In any case, after we kill them, you won't be able to get anything," the golden-haired youth said with contempt. "Arrogant idiot, sooner or later you'll lose your life." Mo Wuxian secretly sneered and nodded. "All right, then I wish you good luck." With that, he turned around and ran up the stairs without looking back. The green-haired youth looked at Mo Wuxian and said disdainfully, "What a cowardly and incompetent trash." The golden-haired youth shook his head. This kind of person, even if he enters the imperial capital, he won't be able to do anything. Following that, the two of them stood on the steps with their arms crossed, looking down at Qin Feiyang and Lu Xingqian. That arrogant attitude, that contemptuous gaze, it was as if they were waiting for their prey. But who was the prey? Chapter 656. At the same time, on the surface of the sea, Feng Wuxia and the other 3 stood on the boat and looked at the words Permitha on the stone tablet with ecstasy on their faces. Suddenly, Feng Wuxia noticed Qin Feiyang and Lu Xingqian on the stone stairs and said in a deep voice, "As expected, they have already reached the other shore." Wan Qiu and the other 2 immediately raised their heads and looked at Qin Feiyang and Lu Xingqian with a cold glint in their eyes. Feng Hua is such a good person, but he died on the bridge of helplessness, and this bastard is still alive and well. It's really unfair. This confirms the saying that good people don't live long, but bad people live for 1,000 years. The 2 sisters gritted their teeth and felt indignant. Feng Wuxia sighed. "In this world, there is no such thing as good and bad people, only the strong and the weak." Wan Qiu nodded. As long as one's fist was strong enough, no one would dare to say anything even if one did something outrageous. There would even be people who admired and followed you because you were strong enough. Suddenly, the 4 of them noticed the 2 blonde young men. Wan Qiu said, "They are from Kuanzhou and Changzhou." Feng Wuxia looked at the 2 blonde young men, then at Qin Feiyang and Lu Xingqian. "The atmosphere is a little strange." "Strange?" Wan Qiu and the twins were stunned. They looked carefully and indeed found a clue. Feng Wuxia's eyes flashed and he looked away. "Ignore them, let's go ashore first." The 4 of them drove the boat and quickly broke through the blood puppet's encirclement and entered the forbidden area. There was no suspense. The four of them immediately stopped and were confused by all kinds of illusions. On the stone stairs, Qin Feiyang and Lu Xingqian had also arrived below the two blonde young men, less than 10 meters away. "Don't you have many companions? Why don't I see them?" The green-haired young man looked at the two of them suspiciously. "Do you still need to ask? They must be dead." The blonde young man laughed. "Look at my brain. I even forgot about this. I'm really muddle-headed." The green-haired youth slapped his forehead angrily. He looked at Qin Feiyang and smiled. "You were trapped in a sea of bitterness with a narrow chance of survival. The fact that you were able to escape is already a blessing from the heavens." Qin Feiyang grinned and said, "Then I wonder if you have accumulated any good karma in your previous lives." "What do you mean?" The two of them raised their eyebrows. Lu Xingqian smiled and asked, "What do you think?" "We." The two looked at each other and smiled. The golden-haired young man looked at Qin Feiyang and said, "I don't want to talk nonsense with you. Immediately hand over the treasure and dagger you're hiding." Ugh! Qin Feiyang was astonished. He was actually thinking about the castle and Chang Shui. The arrogance of these two people far exceeded his imagination. Qin Feiyang crossed his arms and said playfully, "What if I don't hand it over?" "You're not handing it over? Humph! If you don't hand it over today, don't think about leaving the 9 underworlds." The two of them sneered. "So arrogant?" Lu Xingqian raised his eyebrows and said indifferently, "Say it. Do you want to fight one-on-one or together?" "One-on-one? Do you think we have time to waste on you?" The two of them smiled disdainfully. Lu Xingqian said, "So you want to fight together?" The golden-haired young man smiled and said, "The two of us like to beat up rookies like you." Qin Feiyang and Lu Xingqian looked at each other with a smile in their eyes. Qin Feiyang looked at the two of them again and asked seriously, "Do you really like to fight in groups?" "You don't agree?" The two of them were full of arrogance. "Yes, of course. Since you like it, I must fulfill your wish." Qin Feiyang smiled brightly, but Lu Xingqian smiled even brighter than him. Was there something wrong with their heads? Were they looking for a beating? Looking at the smiles on their faces, the golden-haired young man and the green-haired young man felt inexplicably flustered. But when they thought of their own strength, their arrogance came back. The golden-haired young man said, "My patience is limited. Don't play dumb with me anymore." "All right then. I officially announce the start of the dog abuse event." Qin Feiyang waved his hand, and one figure after another appeared beside him. There was Fatso, Wolf King, and the Black Dragon Snake. There was also Ren Wushuang, Shen Mei, Dong Zhengyang, Dongfang Wuhen, and Murong Xiong. Of course, there were also the 4 of them. How is this possible? They're actually not dead. The golden-haired young man and the green-haired young man's expressions changed. Qin Feiyang looked at the crowd and smiled. "Everyone, you heard what they said just now, right? Do you know what to do?" "Of course." The Wolf King chuckled. Immediately, Wolf King and Fatso rubbed their fists and walked towards the two of them. "Damn it, let's go!" the golden-haired young man shouted. The two of them immediately turned around and fled upwards without looking back. "Chase!" Wolf King waved his claws and instantly transformed into a muscular wolf, chasing after the two of them. "Aya, why are you running? Weren't you very arrogant just now? Why are you running away with your tail between your legs now?" Fatso followed closely behind, his face full of ridicule. The two of them were furious in their hearts. Since he was still alive, what was the point of hiding? Wasn't it obvious that he was trying to trick others? Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "Let's go, we'll follow them." "Such a wonderful show, we can't miss it." Lu Xingqian chuckled. Everyone laughed and followed behind Qin Feiyang and Lu Xingqian, surging upwards in a mighty manner. At the same time, hearing the movement below, Mo Wuxian looked down in bewilderment and his expression immediately changed. So many people, such a terrifying lineup. Were they trying to scare people to death? Whoosh! Now he didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly rushed towards the peak, even using all his strength. Because he knew that after Qin Feiyang and the others dealt with the golden-haired young man and the other two, they would definitely not let him go. At this moment, Tan Wu had already reached the peak. In front of him was a square about 10,000 feet wide, located at the top of the clouds, surrounded by clouds and mist, covered with a layer of mysterious color. And in the center of the square, there were 9 blood-colored altars neatly arranged, exuding an ancient aura. In front of each altar, there was a stone tablet engraved with the names of the 9 provinces. Obviously, this was the passage to the outside. In other words, as long as the altar was activated, one would be able to leave the 9 nether yellow springs. Tan Wu looked at the altar that led to He province, his eyes flickering. Finally, he actually turned around and walked to the stone stairs, lowering his head to glance at Qin Feiyang and the others, as if he didn't intend to leave. On the sea, Wan Qiu was the first to wake up from the illusion. But when he reached the other side, he didn't immediately chase after Qin Feiyang and the others. Instead, he stood on the stone stairs, waiting for Feng Wuxie and the others. In fact, he was afraid. The lineup on Qin Feiyang's side was too terrifying, and unless it was a last resort, he couldn't face them head-on. 2 little brats, don't run if you have guts. Yeah, it's so tiring, stop. Fat Lord promises not to hit you. On the stone stairs, Fatso and Wolf King kept hooting. The golden-haired young man and the other 2 fled desperately, looking extremely embarrassed. Looking at this scene, Qin Feiyang and the others also had smiles on their faces. Zhao Yu smiled and said, "There's a saying that is right, mountains and rivers turn, and the one who laughs last is the real winner." Qin Feiyang said, "So it's better to keep a low profile." Low profile? Zhao Yu was stunned and then rolled his eyes. He really couldn't tell how Qin Feiyang was low profile. Ling Yu also looked at Qin Feiyang speechlessly and said, "Wolf King and Fatso probably won't be able to catch up. I'll go stop them." Although Wolf King had the perfect auxiliary battle technique, air escape steps, his cultivation was only a 2-star battle grandmaster. And although the golden-haired young man and the other 2 only had superior auxiliary battle techniques, they were both 3-star battle grandmasters. So in terms of speed, the 2 sides were equal. So, no matter how Wolf King and Fatso chased, they couldn't catch up. No need. Qin Feiyang waved his hand. Huh. Ling Yu frowned. What did he mean? Didn't he want to kill the 2 of them? Qin Feiyang said, "Killing them now is not enough to make them completely despair." Ling Yu and the others looked at each other. What was this guy planning? Lu Xingqian pondered for a while and understood. He gave Qin Feiyang a thumbs up and said, "You also plan to deal with Dongfang Wuhan and Murong Xiong like this?" "Of course," Qin Feiyang replied. Lu Xingqian glanced at Dongfang Wuhan and Murong Xiong from the corner of his eyes, and the corner of his mouth pursed into a meaningful smile. At the same time, Dongfang Wuhan and Murong Xiong were also secretly talking. Murong Xiong sighed. "I didn't expect us to really come to the other side." "Yeah, now we're just waiting to enter the capital." Dongfang Wuhan was also very excited. Murong Xiong asked, "What about Qin Feiyang?" "Him. Humph. Although we only reached the other side with his help, it doesn't mean that I have to be grateful to him. When we leave this place, I will let him know who the real winner is." Dongfang Wuhan sneered secretly. "Yes, we can't let him ride on our heads again." Murong Xiong nodded. "He won't. The #1 alchemist in the inner palace can only be me." Dongfang Wuhan's eyes flashed with a wisp of cold light. Time passed breath by breath. Mo Wuxian, who was in front, had finally climbed to the top. When he saw the 9 altars, He was immediately overjoyed and immediately rushed toward the altars. Swish! However, at this moment, Tan Wu stood in front of him, and Mo Wuxian was slightly taken aback and said angrily, "Tan Wu, what are you doing?" "What am I doing? Isn't it obvious?" Tan Wu revealed a mouthful of white teeth. "You want to help Qin Feiyong stop me? Why? What benefits did Qin Feiyong give you? Tell me, I can give you double." And Mo Wuxian was both shocked and angry. Now that he was only one step away, how could he be stopped here? Tan Wu shook his head and said, "He didn't give me any benefits." "Then why? Don't tell me that the #1 person in the inner palace of He province still has to curry favor with him. Where is your dignity? Where is your face?" And Mo Wuxian roared. "Curry favor with him? Since you want to know so much, then I'll tell you. Back then, he could have killed me, but he didn't do so in the end, so I have to return this favor to him." Tan Wu said, and Mo Wuxian said angrily, "But you also said that your companions all died in his hands. Now that you're still helping him, are you worthy of those who died?" Tan Wu was a 2-star War Master, and he was also a 2-star War Master. If they were to really fight, he was not afraid. Chapter 6, 57. Qin Feiyong did indeed kill my companion, but he did spare my life. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the chance to stand here, much less be the first person to reach the other side. As a person, one must distinguish between gratitude and grudges. Tan Wu said expressionlessly, "It seems that no matter what I say, you won't listen. You're determined to stop me." And Mo Wuxian's gaze was gloomy. "That's right," Tan Wu nodded. "Since that's the case, then I can only offend you. Killing intent, open." And Mo Wuxian let out a stern shout, and blood energy immediately surged all over his body. This place was instantly enveloped by a terrifying killing intent. Clang! With a wave of his hand, a blood blade appeared out of nowhere, emitting a shocking sharpness. This was his strongest battle art. At the same time, a bloody light rushed out from behind him. Within the bloody light, there was a small, blood-colored sword. It was only the length of a thumb, but the sharpness it released was even more terrifying than the blood blade. This was his battle soul. To use his strongest battle art at the first moment and activate his battle soul, it was enough to show how anxious he was now. "Those who block the way die." He raised his head and roared. The blood blade and the small blood-colored sword immediately shot towards Tan Wu. However, Tan Wu did not move at all, and there was not the slightest bit of nervousness on his face. "I admit that you're very strong, but you're very unfortunate to have met me, because I'm invincible in the same realm. Even a 3-star war sect might not be my match." Tan Wu's body shook, and a palm-sized ancient mountain soared into the sky, floating high in the sky, emitting a mysterious aura. Following closely, strands of invisible energy gushed out from the ancient peak, surging in all directions. And when these energies enveloped the blood blade and the small blood-colored arrow, their speed suddenly slowed down, and it was directly slowed by half. How is this possible? And Mo Wuxian's gaze froze. "This is the innate ability of my battle soul, gravity domain. No matter what it is, as long as it's in this domain, its speed will be suppressed by half." As Tan Wu spoke, he walked towards the small blood-colored sword and the blood blade in large strides, as if they were nothing. When he got close, his body slightly tilted, and the blood blade and the small blood-colored sword brushed past him, not causing him any harm. At the same time, the gravity domain rushed towards Mo Wuxian, and Mo Wuxian immediately felt a terrifying gravitational force pressing down on him. He tried to take a step forward, and sure enough, his speed was halved. "Tan Wu, take it that I'm begging you, all right? As long as you let me go, I will repay you double in the future." Initially, Mo Wushan still had some confidence, but upon seeing this terrifying gravity domain, he started to panic. Do you think I'm a child? He's so gullible. Tan Wu shook his head as a trace of ridicule crawled up in his eyes. After spending so much time with Mo Wushan in the Sea of Bitterness, he understood Mo Wushan's character quite well. Not only was Mo Wushan a snobbish person, but he was also a vengeful person. If he really let Mo Wushan leave now, he didn't know how to deal with him in the future. I swear that I will never cause you any trouble. Please believe me, okay? Mo Wushan pleaded. Now he could already sense Qin Feiyang's aura, which meant that he was not far from the peak. If this dragged on, it would be over for him. Tan Wu said coolly, "Want to leave is very simple, defeat me." You damned bastard, do you really think that I, Mo Wushan, am a pushover? If you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Mo Wushan was enraged. Clang! That blood-colored sword and blood blade turned in the air and attacked Tan Wu's back. While he executed auxiliary battle arts, carrying a monstrous killing intent as he charged towards Tan Wu head-on like a madman. At this moment, he could be said to be unscrupulous, but Tan Wu had no intention of clashing head-on with him at all. He just pestered him, not letting him leave. Qin Feiyang and the rest below also sensed the battle fluctuations of Tan Wu and Mo Wushan. Lu Xingqian asked suspiciously, "Why did the two of them start fighting first?" "I don't know." Qin Feiyang shook his head. A moment passed. The golden-haired youth duo finally reached the peak. The moment they saw those 9 altars, their eyes revealed ecstasy. And like Mo Wushan previously, they immediately rushed towards the altars that led to Kun State and Changzhou. "Quickly help me." Seeing the 2 people come up, Mo Wushan also seemed to have seen his savior and hurriedly called for help. However, the golden-haired youth duo did not pay attention to him at all, because now they could not even protect themselves. How could they still help Mo Wushan? But they did not notice that there was an invisible gravitational field in front of them. They directly barged in, and their speed immediately decreased greatly. What's going on? The 2 of them turned pale with fright. Mo Wushan roared. This is the gravitational field, the innate ability of Tan Wu's battle soul. It can suppress our speed. If we want to go to the altar, we have to get rid of him first. What? He actually has such a terrifying battle soul. The golden-haired youth duo trembled both physically and mentally. The next moment, the 2 of them attacked at the same time, charging towards Tan Wu together with Mo Wushan. Seeing this, Tan Wu frowned slightly. With a wave of his hand, battle qi suddenly broke out of his body, turning into a huge wave that pounced towards the 3 of them. Whoosh! It was also at this moment Qin Feiyang and the rest reached the peak one after another. Seeing this, Wolf King chuckled. It's actually 1 against 3. Tan Wu, why don't you go to the heavens? Tan Wu said angrily, "Stop making sarcastic remarks. If it wasn't for Qin Feiyang, I wouldn't be bothered to meddle in other people's business. Why aren't you coming to help?" Although the gravitational field was heaven-defying, there was still a limit. Facing Mo Wushan and the other 2, he had no confidence at all. As expected, the combined attack of the 3 of them directly sent Tan Wu flying, and the gravitational field also collapsed on the spot. Following closely, Mo Wushan and the other 2 did not dare to delay in the slightest, and immediately rushed towards the teleportation altar of Kun Prefecture, Changzhou, and Cloud Prefecture. At the same time, Qin Feiyang looked at Lingyu and the other 3 and transmitted his voice. "The 4 of you can chase after them now, but don't stop them. Wait until they activate the altar before stopping them." Stop them after activating the altar? The 4 of them looked at each other, their eyes filled with suspicion, but they did not ask further. Lingyu, Zhao Yu and Feng Ranran all stepped on a mysterious footwork and chased after the three of them. They're all so fast. Qin Feiyang's eyes narrowed. He had already seen Zhao Yu's speed. She, who had perfect auxiliary combat arts. Almost no one present could catch up with her. But Ling Yu and Feng Ranran's speed was actually on par with hers. In other words, Ling Yu and Feng Ranran also had perfect auxiliary combat arts. Qin Feiyang really could not figure out who exactly were these people. One had to know. Perfect combat arts were almost extinct in the 9 prefectures. To be able to obtain one was already heaven-defying luck. So he could not help but begin to suspect the identity of these 3 people. He looked at Luo Dan, who was next to him, and wondered if this woman also had perfect combat arts. At the same time, Emma Wushin and the other 2 were also panicking. This speed was too terrifying, right? The blonde youth shouted, "Quick! As long as we activate the altar, no matter how fast they are, they can't stop us." Boom! Before they got close to the altar, the 3 of them activated their battle chi and rushed towards the 3 altars. This was because by the time they got close, the altars would have already been activated. By then, they would not have to waste any more time and could just jump up directly. Ling Yu and the other 3 behind the 3 of them did not stop them, but quietly watched the altars activate. Buzz! In less than 3 breaths, the 3 teleportation altars emitted a bright, bloody light at the same time. Emma Wushin and the other 2 were overjoyed. Now, no one could stop them from leaving. Qin Feiyang, just you wait. If I don't settle this score with you, I swear I'm not human. The blonde youth laughed coldly. Emma Wushin and the green-haired youth did not hide the murderous intent on their faces. Since the altars had already activated, they naturally had nothing to worry about. However, they did not notice that Qin Feiyang's lips were pursed into a mocking smile at this moment. 30 meters, 20 meters, 10 meters. A mere 10 meters was just a step for Emma Wushin and the other 2. "We're finally here," the 3 of them shouted excitedly in their hearts. Their faces were also full of smiles. But just as they leaped up and were about to jump onto the altars, Ling Yu and the other 3 behind them suddenly sped up and rushed in front of them. What? The 3 of their faces suddenly changed. At the same time, Ling Yu and the other 2 leaped up and kicked Emma Wushin and the other 2 in the chest. Ah! Accompanied by 3 painful screams, the 3 of them were suddenly sent flying and smashed onto the ground in front of Qin Feiyang and the others, spitting out blood. But the 3 of them did not hesitate and immediately got up and rushed towards the altars. "I'm afraid you won't be able to leave today." Ling Yu and the other 2 stood in front of the altars. The aura of a 3-star battle grandmaster rushed towards Emma Wushin and the other 2 like a tidal wave. Scram! Emma Wushin and the other 2 roared and instantly used their battle techniques to attack Ling Yu and the other 2. "You really don't know what you're talking about. Sacred sword judgment." Zhao Yu smiled coldly and waved her lily-white hand gently. With a loud clang, a 3-foot-long sword appeared out of thin air and destroyed Emma Wushin and the other 2's battle arts as easily as crushing dry weeds. "This is impossible." The 3 of them spat out a mouthful of blood and looked at Zhao Yu in shock. Was this so-called sacred sword judgment also a perfect battle technique? But what made the 3 of them even more desperate was that the bloody light from the 3 altars was dissipating. This also meant that the altars were about to close. "No!" The 3 of them roared hysterically, but it was useless. When the bloody light completely dissipated, the 3 of them knelt on the ground powerlessly, their faces ashen. Qin Feiyang glanced at the 3 of them and smiled faintly. "Do you know why we didn't kill you on the stone stairs?" "Why?" The blonde youth looked at him gloomily. "Because you like pleasure, so we had to fulfill your wish. We let you escape here and let you successfully revive the altars because we wanted you to see hope. And just when you thought you could escape, we pushed you into the abyss and made you completely despair. How is it? Does this feeling of great joy and sorrow, of great ups and downs, feel good? Qin Feiyang smiled. Puff. Hearing this, Mo Wuxian and the other two were instantly enraged and spat out another mouthful of blood. It turned out that from the beginning, they had been toyed with by Qin Feiyang. No matter how hard they tried, they could not escape. Now that they thought about their previous actions, even they felt that it was ridiculous. Chapter 658. It was only at this moment that the four of them realized what was going on. First, he gave the three of them hope. Then he pushed them into hell. This guy's method of torturing people was really good. Don't you guys like to fight in groups? We're just standing here. Why aren't you bringing it on? Wolf King chuckled. The contempt in his eyes was undisguised. Mo Wuxian's gaze trembled. He turned around and knelt on the ground, begging, Qin Feiyang, I was wrong. Can you let me go? Sure. Jump into the sea of bitterness yourself. If you don't die, I won't kill you. Qin Feiyang said indifferently. Mo Wuxian's body and mind trembled. With a bitter face, he said, Aren't you sending me to my death? Why would I? We can escape from the sea of bitterness. With your ability, you can definitely do it too. Qin Feiyang said with a smile. Mo Wuxian's face instantly turned pale. What's the use of begging him? Do you think he's a soft-hearted person? The blonde youth said. Mo Wuxian said angrily, What else do you think we should do? I don't want to die. Don't worry. We won't die because I have a plan to escape. The blonde youth said. Say it. Mo Wuxian and the green-haired youth's spirits rose. There are few one-star battle ancestors among them. As long as we catch one of them, we can use it to threaten them. The blonde youth said. Okay, let's do it. The green-haired youth nodded without hesitation. Because there was no other way, they could only take a gamble. Mo Wuxian gritted his teeth and said, Okay, as long as we can escape, I'll listen to your orders. Then listen carefully. Later, we'll attack Qin Feiyang and attract their attention. You take the opportunity to catch those two women. According to my observation, those two women are the weakest. The blonde youth said. The two women he was referring to were Ren Wushuang and Xinmei. No problem, Mo Wuxian replied. With his strength, he had full confidence that as long as no one was in his way, it would be easy to catch the two of them. In the blink of an eye, as soon as the three of them reached an agreement, the golden-haired youth and the green-haired youth stood up and rushed towards Qin Feiyang with monstrous killing intent. It was as if he was going to fight to the death. Still not giving up? Everyone looked at each other with a hint of mockery in their eyes. Moreover, they didn't move at all. They just looked at the two of them, quietly. Seeing this, the golden-haired youth and his companion were bewildered. What's going on? In any case, they were both 3-star battle grandmasters. Although Qin Feiyang's side had the advantage in numbers, in the face of their sudden attack, they should have been more or less prepared. But why were they so indifferent now? Don't worry so much. This is a good opportunity. Because Qin Feiyang is their backbone. As long as we take him down, we can immediately turn the tables. The golden-haired youth said. The green-haired youth nodded. Qin Feiyang was much more valuable than those two women. The two of them sped towards Qin Feiyang. At the same time, they were paying close attention to Lu Xingqian, Ling Yu, Feng Ranran, and Zhao Yu, because the four of them were the people they were most afraid of. 20 meters, 10 meters. At this moment, the golden-haired youth and his companion were only one step away from Qin Feiyang. Seeing that Lu Xingqian and his companions were still indifferent, the two of them were overjoyed. They suddenly swooped down, and their large hands reached out like an eagle's claw. They were about to grab Qin Feiyang. Whoosh! But at this moment, Luo Dan, who was on the side, took a step forward and stood in front of Qin Feiyang. Bitch, get out of my way! The two of them immediately roared angrily. At the same time, the 5 fingers of the eagle's claw-like hand suddenly contracted and clenched into a fist. Battle chi gushed out and blasted towards Luo Dan. However, the anxious 2 of them didn't notice Luo Dan's cultivation at all. Not only are your characters bad, even your mouths are dirty. You should be slapped. Luo Dan's gaze turned cold. She moved lightly and calmly avoided the 2's fists. Then, she raised her jade-like hand and slapped the 2 of them directly in the face. Smack! 2 crisp slapping sounds were heard. It was especially ear-piercing. The golden-haired youth and his companion were sent flying on the spot. They rolled on the ground, pathetically, and spat out blood. Their faces were swollen like pig heads. As expected, she also mastered the perfect auxiliary battle technique. Qin Feiyang muttered. Luo Dan was right in front of him, so when Luo Dan moved earlier, he saw it clearly. That speed was not inferior to Ling Yu and his companions at all. He looked at the golden-haired youth and his companion again. The 2 of them were stunned. They touched their burning faces and couldn't come back to their senses for a long time. Mo Wuxian, who was next to them, was even more frightened. He didn't expect Qin Feiyang to have such a terrifying woman by his side. At this moment, his heart was filled with fear, and he completely forgot the task given to him by the golden-haired youth. At the same time, Ling Yu, Feng Ranran, and Zhao Yu walked over. Ling Yu smiled and asked, Brother Qin, how do you plan to deal with them? Qin Feiyang smiled and said, Of course, I'll let them have a taste of suffering. Understood. Ling Yu nodded. Don't. Mo Wuxian and his companions suddenly came back to their senses and knelt on the ground. Their pale faces were filled with panic. You don't want it, and you don't want it? Ling Yu sneered. He grabbed Mo Wuxian and dragged him to the edge of the square. Please let me go. Just treat me as a dog that bites people. Being dragged to the edge of the square, Mo Wuxian was scared out of his wits when he saw the sea of blood below. He kept kowtowing to Ling Yu and begging for mercy. Don't compare yourself to a dog because you're not worthy. Ling Yu smiled disdainfully. He lifted Mo Wuxian and threw him out like trash. You bastards, I swear I won't let you go even if I become a ghost. Mo Wuxian roared with hatred. Unable to fly in the air, he could only watch himself fall into the sea of suffering. What could be more torturous than this? More despair? In the end, with a thud, Mo Wuxian fell into the sea of suffering and was instantly swallowed by the waves of blood. Only a voice full of resentment was left, echoing between heaven and earth for a long time. He really killed. Looking at this scene, the blonde youth muttered to himself. His heart was filled with despair. Qin Dage, please let us go, okay? We swear that we will be your servants for the rest of our lives. If we break this oath, may the heavens and earth destroy us. The 2 of them crawled to Qin Feiyang on their knees and begged. Qin Feiyang shook his head. I don't need servants, and you're not worthy. The blonde youth said angrily, Do you really want to kill us all? If you didn't provoke us first, why would we do this to you? So, it's not me who wants to kill you, it's you who are seeking death. Qin Feiyang said lightly, then nodded to Ling Yu and the other 3. The 4 immediately went forward and carried the 2 to the edge of the square. Don't. I beg you. Looking at the sea of blood below, the 2 were terrified. Ling Yu sneered. Even if Qin Feiyang doesn't kill you, we won't let you go. The blonde youth's heart trembled. In a hurry, he shouted, Fight me 1-on-1. Huh. The 4 were stunned. If we lose, you don't have to do anything. We'll jump into the sea of suffering ourselves. But if we win, you'll let us go. The blonde youth said. Zhao Yu smiled and asked, Do you think that's necessary? Why, you don't dare. The blonde youth sneered. Don't dare? Zhao Yu was so angry that he laughed and nodded. Okay, I'll fulfill your wish. Bring it on. We're not challenging you, we're challenging him. The blonde youth pointed at Qin Feiyang and shouted, "Do you dare to fight with me?" Fatso laughed, took a step forward, and said disdainfully, "You think you're qualified to challenge the boss? You want to play? Fat Lord will play with you." The blonde youth glanced at Fatso and sneered. "Qin Feiyang, if you're still a man, don't hide behind others. You're courting death." Fatso's eyes were filled with murderous intent. But at this moment, Qin Feiyang pushed Fatso away and said with a faint smile, "Since you want to challenge me so much, I'll fulfill your wish before you die." Ren Wushuang's face suddenly changed. He grabbed Qin Feiyang's arm and said telepathically, "Feiyang, you're no match for them. Don't be reckless." "Don't worry." Qin Feiyang smiled and gently pushed Ren Wushuang away. Then he walked to the blonde youth and said, "It's too troublesome to fight one by one. Let's fight together." What? At this moment, it was not only Ren Wushuang. Everyone was looking at Qin Feiyang with dumbstruck expressions. 1 against 2? Was this guy crazy? Didn't he know that the two blonde youth were both 3-star War Master? Even Wolf King and Fatso couldn't help but worry. They naturally understood Qin Feiyang's strength. But the two of them weren't simple people either. The most important thing was that they had never fought with the blonde youth and knew nothing about their methods and trump cards. If they had some terrifying trump card, wouldn't they be digging their own grave? At the same time, the blonde youth and the other two were also stunned. They never thought that Qin Feiyang would be so arrogant. When they came back to their senses, a brilliant smile immediately crawled onto their faces. 1 against 2? This arrogant bastard really didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. The green-haired youth said, "You're the one who said it. You can't go back on your word halfway." Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry, I won't go back on my word." Boom! The two of them looked at each other. The pressure of a 3-star War Master broke out of their bodies without holding back and pounced toward Qin Feiyang. The moment the pressure enveloped Qin Feiyang, a victorious smile appeared on their faces. "Qin Feiyang, you're too arrogant. Actually, we can see that your strength is indeed not bad, but your cultivation is too low. To deal with you, I only need to use pressure. Now you can't even move. How are you going to use your methods?" The two of them laughed. "Is that so?" Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and took a step forward. "How is this possible?" The blonde youth and the other two glared angrily, and their eyeballs were about to fall out. Fatso joked, "Didn't anyone tell you that the boss has already opened the gate of potential? Pressure is useless against him." What? The gate of potential? The two of them trembled in disbelief. They really didn't know. Chapter 659. Qin Feiyang laughed. "You don't even know this. It seems that in your eyes, I'm really just a small character that isn't worth mentioning." The two of them looked at him and muttered to themselves for a moment. In the past, they did not put Qin Feiyang in their eyes. They even thought that the rumors about Qin Feiyang were exaggerated. But only now did they understand that this person was even more terrifying than the rumors. One had to know. The gate of potential was a legendary existence. Yet this person had opened it. This showed how astonishing his potential and talent were. It was also enough to see how terrifying this person's future achievements were. But Qin Feiyang's cultivation was a 1-star War Master. This was an unchangeable fact. A mere 1-star War Master. No matter how heaven-defying he was, how strong could he be? Boom! The two of them looked at each other, and a cold glint appeared in their eyes. Following that, the two of them took a step forward at the same time, raised their fists, and punched towards Qin Feiyang. Fight! Qin Feiyang activated the battle character art without hesitation. His long hair and eyes instantly turned red. At the same time that they activated the battle character art, the two of them punched Qin Feiyang's chest. Puff! Qin Feiyang was sent flying on the spot, and blood spurted out of his mouth. However, with the protection of the battle character art, coupled with the fact that the two of them only used normal attacks, they did not cause any fatal injuries to him. Finally, he steadily landed on the ground, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and said with a faint smile, "Is this the power of your punch?" Their gazes froze. Although they did not use any battle arts, this punch contained their full strength, and they were actually able to withstand it. At the same time, a great sense of humiliation emerged in their hearts. 2 3-star War Master joined hands and attacked with all their might, yet they were unable to defeat the other party. Boom! Their bodies trembled, and battle chi surged out from their bodies like a torrent. Luo Yen, sword formation. The golden-haired youth roared, and the battle chi that filled the sky instantly turned into 9 battle swords, forming a sword formation that rotated above his head. Each battle sword seemed to be cast from divine iron, emitting a bone-piercing sharpness. In the meantime, the green-haired youth waved his hands, and the temperature in the area plummeted, as if winter had arrived. Clang! Following closely, all of his battle chi gathered together and condensed into a huge, profound ice sword that was dozens of meters long, hovering in the sky. Kill! As the two of them roared, the profound ice greatsword and the sword array swooped down and slashed towards Qin Feiyang. High-grade slaughter battle arts, coupled with their cultivation of a 3-star War Master. They even have the power to fight against a 6-star War Master. How is this Qin Feiyang going to deal with them? Ling Yu and the others thought to themselves. Qin Feiyang raised his head and looked at the sword formation and the black ice greatsword, his eyes gradually becoming sharp. Boom! He raised his arm, golden light surging in his palm. Immediately, with Qin Feiyang as the center, a mighty divine might rolled out in all directions. What is this? The golden-haired young man narrowed his eyes. No matter what it is, he will definitely lose. The green-haired young man snorted coldly. As long as they used their battle arts, even if Qin Feiyang had a perfect battle art, he would not be their match. This was because Qin Feiyang's cultivation was 2 whole realms lower than theirs. However, they did not know that the return character formula was not something that a battle art could compare to. The return character formula was one of the 6-word divine formulas. To be able to be called a divine formula, its lethality was naturally stronger than a perfect battle art. Boom! Qin Feiyang's arm trembled, and a golden light burst out from his palm, turning into a monstrous torrent that drowned the sky and blasted towards the sword array and the profound ice greatsword. Clang! An ear-piercing sound suddenly exploded in the sky. Under everyone's incredulous gazes, the sword array and the profound ice greatsword were in a stalemate with the golden light for a while, then suddenly turned in the air and charged towards the golden-haired young man and his companion. Seeing this scene, the golden-haired young man and his companion were so scared that their souls almost left their bodies, and they hurriedly fled. Boom! However, just as they left, the sword array and the profound ice greatsword arrived behind them. The 2 battle arts blasted onto the ground and immediately created a storm of sword chi that swept wildly. Although the golden-haired young man and his companion escaped in time, they were still swept by the sword chi storm and were instantly covered in cuts and bruises, dripping with blood. The heart-wrenching pain caused their faces to contort, and they held in pain. Boss is too awesome. Fatso clenched his fists, and his face was flushed red as if he had been injected with chicken blood. Wolf King rolled his eyes at him and said, "It's not that he's awesome. It's the return character formula that's awesome." The current situation was very obvious. The return character formula's power was at least twice as strong as a perfect battle art. In other words, if a perfect battle art could increase one's combat strength by 4 realms, then the return character formula could increase one's combat strength by 5 or even 6 realms. Bang! The golden-haired young man and his companion rolled on the ground, their hair disheveled, and their bodies badly mangled. They were in an extremely sorry state. Even with the battle art, we still lost. This is impossible. We must be dreaming. Dong Jingyan could not help but feel worried. Indeed, as Dong Jingyan had expected, Qin Feiyang was not feeling well at all. The cold air rushed toward him, and his limbs were almost stiff. The invisible sharpness even tore his clothes, leaving glaring wounds on his body. Looks like I've underestimated their battle souls. However, you're not the only ones with battle souls. His eyes shone brightly as he muttered to himself. Boom! A wave of fire surged out from behind him. Amidst the wave of fire, the 9-leaf fire lotus was completely red, and it exuded a majestic aura. The temperature in this place rose rapidly as well. In an instant, the void around Qin Feiyang seemed to have turned into a huge furnace. Following that, Qin Feiyang waved his arm. The 9-fire lotus leaves fell at the same time. They swept up waves of fire as they shot toward the 2 flood dragons. Explode! Qin Feiyang's eyes shone brightly as he shouted. Every word was sonorous and powerful, and it resounded through the clouds. Boom! The 9-fire lotus leaves exploded one after another, and the destructive shock waves immediately surged out in all directions with an overwhelming force. At this moment, the sky changed color and the void trembled. Dong Jingyan and the others were forced to retreat. Their eyes were filled with shock. It's rare to see 9 fire lotus leaves exploding at the same time. Fatso muttered. That's right. This proves that their battle souls are really powerful. Wolf King said. Fatso's eyes were filled with disdain as he snorted. No matter how powerful they are, how can they be more powerful than Boss? Boss has 3 battle souls. 3! When Dong Jingyan and the others heard this, they looked at Fatso in shock. Ling Yu and the other 3 might not know, but Dong Jingyan and the others knew very well that Qin Feiyang only had 2 battle souls. Why would Fatso say that he had 3? Could it be that Qin Feiyang was hiding another battle soul? Fatso immediately realized that he had let it slip. He smiled sheepishly and said, I'm sorry, it's 2. Really? Lu Xingqian looked at him doubtfully. Fatso said angrily, Nonsense. How can there be anyone in this world who has 3 battle souls? That's true. Lu Xingqian nodded. People who had 2 battle souls were already rare, let alone 3. Such people did not exist at all. Everyone did not think too much about it. They looked at the sky again and saw that the 2 flood dragons only had half of their bodies left. The golden-haired young man and Dong Jingyan looked at their battle souls in shock. What kind of battle soul was the 9-leaf fire lotus? How could it be so ridiculously powerful? However, Qin Feiyang was slightly disappointed. Initially, he thought that the explosion of the 9 fire lotus leaves could easily destroy the 2 flood dragons. However, only half of them were destroyed. However, when he thought about it, there was a huge gap between his cultivation base and theirs. The fact that the 9-leaf fire lotus could do this proved that it was stronger than the flood dragon's battle souls. If he was a 3-star combat grandmaster now, the 9-leaf fire lotus would definitely be able to achieve an overwhelming victory. In fact, he might only need 1 fire lotus leaf to destroy the 2 flood dragons' battle souls. When he thought about this, he felt relieved. It's time to end this. Then he muttered under his breath. His gaze changed abruptly. It was as sharp as a blade. Clang! Another wave of flames shot into the sky. Amidst the flames, the crimson battle sword was like a divine weapon. Sword Qi shot into the sky and tore through the clouds. Destroy! As Qin Feiyang waved his hand, the battle sword tore through the sky and slashed toward the 2 flood dragons. Qin Feiyang did not even use his innate ability. There was no need for that. The 2 flood dragons were already arrows at the end of their flight. Roar! As expected, the battle sword's aura was like a rainbow. The two flood dragons were reduced to ashes on the spot. Pooh! The destruction of their battle souls caused the golden-haired young man and his companion to tremble. They kept vomiting blood. Their blood-stained faces were ashen. Qin Feiyang was too powerful. Although he was only a one-star combat grandmaster, he was like an invincible god of war. A sense of helplessness rose in their hearts. Clang! The crimson battle sword descended from the sky and stopped above the two flood dragons' heads. Sensing the terrifying sharpness, the two flood dragons immediately collapsed powerlessly. Qin Feiyang looked at the two flood dragons from afar and said indifferently, "You've lost." "We've lost," the two flood dragons muttered with self-mockery on their faces. Two 3-star combat grandmasters against a 1-star combat grandmaster. Yet they still lost. It was too laughable. Rather than living with humiliation, it was better to die with pride. Swoosh! Chapter 660. Looking at the surging waves on the sea, Qin Feiyang and the others were a little stunned. They thought that the two of them would shamelessly beg for mercy again, but they didn't expect them to jump down so straightforwardly. Lingyu smiled and said, "Their current behavior is quite admirable. They have no choice. They have nothing left but their last bit of self-respect." Tan Wu sighed. Wolf King turned to look at him and asked in confusion, "You just said that you stopped them for little Qin Zi?" "Yes." Tan Wu nodded and looked at Qin Feiyang. "From now on, you and I don't owe each other anything." Qin Feiyang said with a smile, "We're all family." "You're too polite." "Family?" Lu Xingchen and the others were surprised. What was going on? Weren't these two people at odds? When did they become so close? Tan Wu scratched his head and was also dumbfounded. Only Fatso and Wolf King knew that Qin Feiyang hadn't given up on the idea of subduing Tan Wu. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "You don't understand? Then I'll explain it to you. As long as you agree to join us, we'll be family." Tan Wu's face darkened, and he said angrily, "Don't even think about it." Qin Feiyang said, "I don't want to either, but I like you too much. I can't control myself." Damn, so mushy. Everyone present had goosebumps all over their bodies. This bastard, couldn't he be more serious when he spoke? A man telling another man that he liked you, and even said that he couldn't control himself. Wasn't this perverted? At the same time, Tan Wu also looked at Qin Feiyang vigilantly. His hands were placed in front of his chest, looking like he was startled. Obviously, he really misunderstood and thought that Qin Feiyang had some special fetish. Cough, cough. Ren Wushuang glanced at Tan Wu and coughed dryly. "Feiyang, you have to watch your words." Ugh. Qin Feiyang was stunned. He looked helplessly at Tan Wu and said, "Don't misunderstand. I only fancy your talent and ability. I'm not interested in you as a person." "Who?" Tan Wu immediately heaved a sigh in relief and shook his head as he said, "This is absolutely impossible." Qin Feiyang said, "What if I tell you that I can help you unlock the door of potential?" Tan Wu's eyes trembled. Who wouldn't be tempted by such a temptation? However, to be Qin Feiyang's follower for the rest of his life, he really couldn't let go of his pride. In the end, he shook his head and said, "I'm sorry. Although I'm eager to open the door of potential, I prefer to be unrestrained." Qin Feiyang couldn't help but frown. This person was really stubborn. Looking at Qin Feiyang's expression, a sense of uneasiness involuntarily welled up in Tan Wu's heart. He clasped his hands and said, "The favor has already been repaid. The remaining matters have nothing to do with me either. Farewell." Of the 36 stratagems, escape is the best strategy, but at this moment, Wolf King took a step in front of him and said with a chuckle, "Want to leave? It's not that easy." "Fatso, also had a sinister smile on his face as he blocked behind Tan Wu. Tan Wu's gaze turned dark. He was not afraid of anyone present except for Wolf King, because Wolf King's battle soul was seriously too terrifying. Qin Feiyong looked at Tan Wu, his gaze flickering indeterminately. Finally, he said to Wolf King and Fatso, "Let him go!" Amen? One man and one wolf frowned. Tan Wu also had a look of surprise. Qin Feiyong said with a faint smile, "I believe that sooner or later you'll come and find me one day. I also welcome you to come and find me at any time." "That will never happen." Tan Wu's reply was very straightforward. Qin Feiyong smiled and said, "Then we'll wait and see." Tan Wu took a deep look at Qin Feiyong, then walked straight to the altar and quickly activated it. Qin Feiyong seemed to have suddenly thought of something and said with a voice transmission, "Tan Wu, I have a question to ask you. Is your gravity domain effective on everyone?" "It's effective on everyone, but it also depends on the other party's cultivation. If the opponent's cultivation is the same as mine, it can suppress half of their speed. But if their cultivation is one small realm higher than mine, then they can only suppress 1/3 of their speed. If it's 2 small realms higher than me, there will also be a certain suppression effect, but the effect won't be great." Tan Wu explained with a voice transmission. Qin Feiyong said with a smile, "This is already very powerful." In a battle between powerhouses, speed was the key to affecting the battle situation. Even if it was just a little bit faster, it was possible to turn defeat into victory. Are there any other questions? If not, I'll give you a piece of advice. Tan Wu said. "Speak." Qin Feiyong said. Tan Wu said, "You killed everyone in my He province. When the big shots find out about this, they will definitely come looking for trouble with you. You'd better be careful." After saying that, Tan Wu jumped onto the altar and quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. "Looking for trouble with me," Qin Feiyong muttered, the corners of his mouth pursing into a sneer. Fatso frowned and asked with a voice transmission in confusion, "Boss, didn't you want to take him in as your subordinate? Why did you let him go?" "Then let me ask you first. If it were you and someone else offered to help you open the door of potential, would you refuse? I want to hear the truth." Qin Feiyong asked secretly. "No." Fatso shook his head. But this person refused. What does this mean? This means that his will is very firm and he won't be confused by external things. And this kind of person, once he chooses to follow someone, he will always follow them wholeheartedly and will never betray them. So we can't use force to deal with him. Qin Feiyong said with a smile. "So that's how it is." Fatso suddenly understood and chuckled. "Boss, don't worry. Fat Lord will never betray you. Come on, if not for the potential pill, if not for my identity, you might have flown away long ago." Qin Feiyong rolled his eyes at him. Fatso's expression changed, and he said angrily, "Damn, after going through fire and water with you for so long, you still don't believe in Fat Lord. So sad." "Then you can slowly be sad." Qin Feiyong glanced at Fatso indifferently, then lowered his head to look at Wan Qiu and the other 3. This damn Fatso, when he was smart, he was a little too smart, but when he was stupid, he was so stupid that it made people helpless. He couldn't tell that he was just joking, but he actually took it seriously. At this moment, the 4 of them had already gotten rid of the illusion, but they did not go ashore. They stood on the boat and looked up at Qin Feiyong and the others. Wolf King sneered. "They are obviously afraid that we will attack them, so they want to wait for us to leave before going ashore." "Is it useful?" Qin Feiyong smiled coldly. "It is indeed useless." Wolf King waved his claws, and a bright battle chi appeared, roaring towards Wan Qiu and the others. "Damn it, they really haven't forgotten about us." Wan Qiu's face suddenly became gloomy. Feng Wuxie shouted, "Don't talk nonsense, go ashore!" Staying in the sea of bitterness would only lead to death in the end. But as long as they went ashore, they might find a chance to live. The four of them immediately drove the boat and rushed towards the stone stairs. A mere 100 meters was naturally nothing to the four of them, and they quickly reached the shore and climbed up the first step of the stone stairs. At the same time, the battle chi swooped down and suddenly blasted into the sea of blood, causing a wave of blood dozens of meters high to surge towards the four of them. Seeing this, the four of them hurriedly rushed up the stone stairs. Splash! Boom! The waves of blood surged over, violently slamming against the stone stairs, making a deafening sound. After escaping from danger, the four of them stood on a high step and looked down at the huge waves with lingering fear. If they did not choose to go ashore just now, they would have been swallowed by the waves of blood. But the crisis was not over. Qin Feiyang and the others were still watching from above. What should we do? The twin sisters looked helplessly at Feng Wuxie and Wan Qiu. But Feng Wuxie and Wan Qiu were also helpless. At the edge of the square, Lu Xingqian looked at Feng Wuxie and the others, and his eyes flashed as he sent a voice transmission. Qin Feiyang, let them go! Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. Lu Xingqian thought to himself, just do me a favor. Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment and nodded. Okay, I'll do a favor, but I hope you can tell me the reason as soon as possible. Lu Xingqian said, when the time is right, I will tell you everything. Qin Feiyang didn't say anything else. He turned to look at Ling Yu and the other three, cupped his hands and said with a smile, the four of you, our cooperation along the way can be considered very pleasant. When we enter the imperial capital in the future, I hope that the four of you can help us out a little. Brother Qin, you are too polite. We are the ones who need help. Ling Yu smiled. Qin Feiyang smiled and cupped his hands. Then we will see each other in the imperial capital. Okay, the four of them nodded. Let's go. Qin Feiyang called out and walked towards the altar that led to the spiritual state. They are leaving just like that? Dong Jinyang was slightly taken aback. He caught up with Qin Feiyang and asked, why didn't you kill them? Now was the best time to kill Wan Qiu and the others. If they missed it, they might never find such an opportunity again. Let's talk about it after we enter the imperial capital. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly. Dong Zhenyang looked at Qin Feiyang suspiciously. He really could not figure out what this guy was thinking. Walking to the altar, Qin Feiyang raised his arm and was about to activate the teleportation altar. However, he suddenly put down his arm and frowned. What's wrong? Fatso and the others looked at him in confusion. Qin Feiyang said, I seem to have forgotten that there is one more thing to do. What is it? Everyone was puzzled. Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment, and his brows gradually relaxed as he smiled. I remember. As he spoke, he waved his hand, and a stream of red sword energy flowed into the altar. Soon, the altar bloomed with a dazzling light. Qin Feiyang looked at Dong Jinyang and the others and said with a smile, Go up! Everyone looked at him suspiciously and jumped onto the altar one after another. But just as Dongfang Wuhin and Morong Xiong jumped onto the altar, Qin Feiyang suddenly stretched out his hand and pulled the two of them down, making them roll on the ground awkwardly. This action immediately attracted everyone's attention. Wolf King and Lu Xingqian also remembered that there was indeed one more thing to do. There was also a touch of ridicule in their eyes. However, Dongfang Wuhin and Morong Xiong were completely unaware of it. They only thought that Qin Feiyang was dissatisfied with them going up first. The two of them hurriedly got up, retreated to the side, and smiled apologetically. Junior brother Qin, sorry, you go first. Qin Feiyang crossed his arms and looked at the two of them playfully. The two of them were shocked, and an uneasy premonition welled up in their hearts. Qin Feiyang asked with a smile, Don't you think it's strange? What's strange? The two of them were puzzled. Qin Feiyang raised the corner of his mouth slightly and said, Answer my question first. Do you think that you deserve to be killed for what you did on the way? Yes, yes, yes. Chapter 661. Qin Feiyang continued. Then do you know why not only did I not kill you, I even helped you reach the other side? Dongfeng Wuhin suppressed the uneasiness in his heart and smiled. Because junior brother Qin has a good heart. Ha. Qin Feiyang couldn't help but laugh and shook his head. It's not like you don't know me. Do I look like a good person? Looking at the smile on Qin Feiyang's face, the uneasiness in their hearts grew stronger. Suddenly, Qin Feiyang's gaze turned cold as he sneered. The reason why I didn't kill you was because I wanted to keep you alive until now. The two of them trembled both physically and mentally, and their faces were filled with panic. You've seen the despair of Emo Wuxian and the other two, right? You'll be the same as them. No, you'll be even more desperate than them. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed with a cold light. Junior brother Qin, please don't. We've already sincerely repented. Please let us live. The two of them knelt down without hesitation and kowtowed like they were pounding garlic. Their foreheads hit the ground and made thumping sounds. Let you go. All right, I'll give you a chance. The altar is right in front of you and has already been activated. As long as you can reach it, I won't kill you. Qin Feiyang smiled coldly. Whoosh! The two of them looked at each other. Then they immediately got up and went around Qin Feiyang at top speed. Then they jumped and landed on the altar. Naive. But Fatso, who was standing on the altar, smiled disdainfully and kicked the two of them back. Bang! The two of them rolled on the ground, their eyes swollen and bruised. But now, how could they have the time to care about their injuries? They quickly knelt on the ground and begged, Junior brother Qin, please don't kill us. That wasn't enough. The two of them looked at Ren Wuxuang and said, Junior brother Qin listens to you the most. Can you help us plead for mercy? We really know our mistakes. I've already pleaded for you more than once or twice. But what about you? You still haven't changed. Ren Wuxuang said expressionlessly, We've already changed. Didn't you see it? We didn't do anything after that. The two of them shouted anxiously. Ren Wuxuang looked at the two of them coldly and looked at Qin Feiyang and said, Feiyang, quickly get rid of them. You damned woman. Since we can't live, then you can't live either. The faces of the two instantly became distorted. Like two mad beasts, they rushed towards Ren Wuxuang. You actually dare to scold her? You really don't know death. Fatty clenched his fists and jumped off the altar. With a single step, he charged forward and punched out with both fists. Two fists landed solidly on the two men's lower abdomens. Their sea of qi shattered on the spot, and their blood-curdling screams resounded through the skies. He directly threw Wuxuang and threw Feiyang. At last, without any suspense, the two of them fell into the sea of bitterness with hearts full of resentment and despair, drowning in the waves of blood. Trash! Fatso glanced at the sea in disdain, then turned to Qin Feiyang and laughed. Boss, it's done. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and said, Let's go. Okay. Fatso shouted and quickly jumped up the altar. Qin Feiyang also jumped up and saluted Lingyu and the others. Goodbye. Goodbye. The four of them also saluted. Only after Qin Feiyang and the others disappeared did the four of them look away. Ling Yu shook his head and smiled. This guy really hasn't changed at all. Anyone who offends him doesn't end well. The three of them also had a smile on their faces. But suddenly, Feng Ranran frowned and asked suspiciously, What's going on with Wan Qiu and the others? Qin Feiyang was planning to kill them before. Why did he suddenly give up? Why don't we help him get rid of them? Zhao Yu was eager to try. Don't. Ling Yu hurriedly stopped her. Qin Feiyang must have his reasons for doing this. It's better if we don't interfere. That's right, if we ruin his plans when we meet in the future, he might blame us. Luo Dan smiled. Boring. Zhao Yu pouted his red lips. Ling Yu shook his head and laughed. Let's go. It's time to report to that old man. With that, the four of them also activated the altar and left. However, Wan Qiu and the others did not know that Qin Feiyang and the others had left. Because the teleportation altar was in the center of the square, they could not see it. They all thought that Qin Feiyang and the others were still waiting for them. Therefore, the four of them were hesitant. Time passed breath by breath, and after an hour, Feng Wuxia finally could not hold it in and said angrily, "Isn't it just death? What's the big deal? You guys wait here, I'll go meet them." After saying that, he ignored the twins' attempts to stop him and dashed upwards. But when he reached the peak, he was dumbfounded. Where are they? Why are they all gone? After a long while, he came back to his senses. He walked to the edge of the square and shouted at Wan Qiu and the others, "They're all gone, come up!" Gone. The three of them looked at each other in confusion. When they reached the peak, they looked at the empty square and could not come back to their senses for a long time. Feng Wuxia said, "Although I don't know why, I'm sure we're saved." That bastard pervert, what is he planning? The sisters frowned. They really could not figure it out. "Don't think about it, let's go," Feng Wuxia urged. He did not want to stay in this damned place for a moment longer. The sisters nodded and followed Feng Wuxia to the altar that led to Kong Province. Wan Qiu looked at the backs of the three and said, "The next time we meet in the imperial capital, we might be opponents. At that time, I won't show mercy." "Then let's wait and see." Feng Wuxia smiled evilly. He activated the altar and left without looking back. Wan Qiu glanced at the endless sea of blood with a cold glint in his eyes. He muttered, "Qin Feiyang, just you wait, I'll settle this score with you." Then he activated the altar and left. This place soon fell into a dead silence. Butterfly Valley, spiritual state. In the secret chamber under the small wooden building, the ugly old woman sat beside the teleportation altar with her eyes slightly narrowed. Suddenly, she opened her eyes and two beams of light shot out. Then, she looked at the teleportation altar, which suddenly emitted a bright light. "Are they back?" The ugly old woman muttered, looking nervous and expectant. Suddenly, several figures appeared on the altar out of thin air. The leader was Qin Feiyang. "They're back." Looking at the familiar secret chamber, Qin Feiyang and the others let out long sighs of relief. Thinking back to the years in the 9th level of hell, it was like a nightmare. Collecting their thoughts, they jumped off the altar one after another and looked at the ugly old woman with fear. They bowed and said, "Greetings, Senior." When they first came to Butterfly Valley, the scene of this old woman brutally killing those who wanted to pick herbs was still vivid in their minds. However, the ugly old woman didn't care about the others. Her gaze was firmly locked onto Qin Feiyang as she said, "Did you win?" "Yes. Although we're not the first people to reach the other side, we're all in the top 50. Qin Feiyang smiled. "Good." The ugly old woman was overjoyed. She patted Qin Feiyang's shoulder and nodded. "Kid, I knew you wouldn't let me down." Qin Feiyang scratched his head and laughed dryly. After the ugly old woman calmed down, she glanced at everyone and said coldly, "Qin Feiyang and Fatso stay here. Everyone else go out first." "Yes." Lu Xingqian and the others responded respectfully and left the secret room as if they were running for their lives. The Wolf King lay on Qin Feiyang's shoulder, and the black dragon snake coiled around Fatso's wrist. Naturally, they stayed behind. "You're being so mysterious. You're definitely up to no good." Fatso pursed his lips and said, "Old witch, can you give us the antidote for the black fiend poison now?" "What did you call me?" The ugly old woman's face turned cold. No, it's Senior." Fatso's expression changed. With a flattering smile, he changed his words. "Senior, can you give us the antidote?" Before entering the 9th level of hell, the ugly old woman gave them the black fiend poison again. She even said that it was an evolved version of the black fiend poison. Although they didn't pay much attention to it in the 9th level of hell, it was still troublesome. The ugly old woman rolled her eyes at him and took out 2 black pills and threw them to the 2 of them. The pills were the size of a finger and emitted a faint fragrance. Qin Feiyang and Fatso each grabbed one and threw it into their mouths. Then they looked into their hearts. That pill was really magical. As soon as it entered their bodies, it turned into a wave of energy and went straight to their hearts. In less than 10 breaths, the black fiend poison was completely neutralized. Seeing that the black fiend poison was neutralized, Qin Feiyang couldn't help but let out a long breath. He looked up at the ugly old woman and asked, "Senior, why did you use this method to force us to win?" The ugly old woman pondered for a moment and sighed. "Because I want to leave the spiritual state and enter the imperial capital." Leave the spiritual state? Qin Feiyang and Fatso looked at each other, their eyes full of suspicion. "Seeing that you two get along quite well, I'll tell you. I'm actually the previous mansion master of the spiritual state," the ugly old woman said. Qin Feiyang, Fatso, and Wolf King's eyes widened. They never thought that this old witch was actually the previous mansion master. No wonder even Wang Hong had to be respectful when he saw her. "Isn't it a little hard to believe?" The ugly old woman laughed. It would have been fine if she didn't laugh, but this laugh made the scar on her face even more twisted and terrifying. The 2 men and 2 beasts didn't dare to look. Qin Feiyang nodded and said, "It is a little hard to believe." "Humph. Let me tell you, I'm much stronger than Old Man Ren. It's just that ever since I stepped down, I've been staying here and have never shown my face in front of anyone. So much so that not many people know me." The ugly old woman snorted. Qin Feiyang frowned and said, "Then why are you staying here, Senior?" "This old body is here to protect this teleportation altar, because this is not only the passage to the netherworld, but also the only passage to the imperial capital. So there must be someone guarding here at all times," the ugly old woman explained. "So that's how it is." Qin Feiyang and Fatso were enlightened. Fatso asked, "Then does the other 8 states also have such altars?" "Yes." The ugly old woman nodded. Qin Feiyang was puzzled. "Then why did you step down, Senior?" "Because I want to live in the imperial capital forever. Although being the mansion master gives me the opportunity to enter the imperial capital, this will never be realized." The ugly old woman sighed deeply. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.